Welcome, welcome. You're here at Supreme Harry. Today we present to you, what if Fleur's Veela grandmother sensed Harry's aura at World Cup and declared him lost Veela Prince of Ancient Bloodline. Like and subscribe if you want more awesome stories. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. Chapter 1, The Grandmother's Eyes. The Quidditch World Cup was the loudest thing Harry had ever heard, and he'd once stood 50 feet from an exploding cauldron in Snape's dungeon. 80,000 witches and wizards packed into stadium seats that shouldn't have been able to hold them, all of them screaming at once, and the sound didn't echo so much as build, layer on layer of noise until the air itself felt thick with it. Green and red sparks burst overhead every few seconds. Someone 3 rows down had conjured an actual Bulgarian mountain range in miniature on the armrest beside them. The Irish supporters had their leprechauns doing formation flying above the upper tiers. It was magnificent, ridiculous chaos, and Harry loved every second of it. He was wedged between Ron and Hermione in the top box, the best seats in the stadium, courtesy of Arthur Weasley's ministry connections, and he'd been leaning forward with his elbows on the rail since the match started, watching Krum with something between admiration and professional envy. Krum flew like gravity was a suggestion. Like the broom was an afterthought and the real vehicle was something internal, some engine of will and velocity that the broom just happened to be attached to. He's going for it, Ron breathed. He's going for the snitch right now. The match isn't even. Look, Ireland's still 160 points ahead. He knows he can't win the points race, Harry said. So he ends it on his terms. That's mad. That's smart. Hermione wasn't watching Krum. She was watching Harry watching Krum, with the particular expression she got when she was filing something away for later consideration. What none of them noticed, what nobody in their section of the box noticed, because the entire crowd was on its feet now as Krum spiraled downward in that devastating, near-vertical dive, was the old woman 4 rows behind them who had stopped watching the match entirely. She was watching Harry. Apollon Delacour's mother had lived to 147 years old and died knowing the names of every aura she had ever touched. She had catalogued them the way a perfumer catalogues scents, precisely, reverently, with the understanding that no two were alike and that some were so rare they might only appear once in a generation, or once in a century, or once in the long cold span of time that stretched between the first Veela and whatever came after. Apollon herself was only 63, which made her young by the standards of the Coven of Argenteau, and she had inherited her mother's gift in full measure. She sensed auras the way other people sense temperature, automatically, constantly, without effort. Most of the time it was background noise. Thousands of people, thousands of warm human signatures, pleasant enough but indistinct, the way a crowded room smells of perfume and sweat and food all blended into something that registers as simply people. But occasionally, rarely, something cut through. She had been in conversation with her daughter Sylvie about the Irish Seeker's positioning when it happened. A thread of something that didn't belong. Not human. Not quite Veela either, though it carried the unmistakable harmonic of old Veela blood, the deep resonance, the gold and silver shimmer of aura that characterized the pure lines. But beneath that, or perhaps more accurately through that, was something older and stranger and more powerful than anything she had catalogued in 60 years of sensing. Apollon stopped mid-sentence. Sylvie looked at her. "Maman?" "Be quiet," Apollon said, very softly, and closed her eyes. She turned her face like a compass needle finding north, slow and certain, until she was oriented toward the source. 4 rows ahead and 6 seats to the right. She opened her eyes. A boy. Black hair, glasses, green eyes currently fixed on the match below with a kind of hungry attention she recognized, the attention of someone who flew, who understood flying, for whom the seeker dive happening below was not just spectacle but language. She looked at him for a very long time. Around her, the stadium erupted as Krum caught the snitch. 80,000 people on their feet, sound like a physical force, sparks and leprechaun gold and a Bulgarian mountain range exploding with celebratory light. Apollon didn't move. Didn't look away. Behind the boy, she noticed her granddaughter Fleur turning in her seat, scanning the box, and their eyes met. Fleur frowned slightly at whatever she saw in her grandmother's face, then followed Apollin's gaze toward the black-haired boy. Fleur looked at the boy, then back at Apollin, with a question in her expression. Apollin mouthed 2 words. The noise was too great for speech. Come here. The box emptied gradually, the noise dropping in waves as people filed out. Harry was in no rush. He watched the last of the post-match spectacle. A flock of scarlet and gold birds that the Irish supporters had conjured were doing a slow victory lap of the stadium, trailing emerald sparks, and felt the specific peaceful emptiness that came after something extraordinary. The feeling of having witnessed something that would sit in memory forever, clean and complete. He was still watching when he became aware that someone was standing beside him. Not the way you become aware of a presence through sight or sound, but through something else, a warmth, almost, or a pressure in the air, like a change in barometric conditions. He turned his head. The woman was old in a way that was completely different from aged. She wasn't frail. She wasn't soft. She was sharp and still, and her eyes were the pale silver gray of winter sky, and she was looking at him with an expression he couldn't immediately classify. Not curiosity. Not hostility. Something that had weight to it. Behind her stood Fleur Delacour. Harry recognized her because half the box had been quietly discussing her since the Delacour party arrived, the kind of attention that followed Veela blood like a wake follows a boat, and beside Fleur was a younger woman who might have been her mother, all of them watching Harry with varying degrees of intensity. "You are Harry Potter," the old woman said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah," Harry said, because it never really was. "I am Apollin Delacour's mother. You may call me Grandmere, as everyone does." She paused. "Or you may call me Madame Beaumont, if you prefer formality. It makes no difference to what I need to tell you." Harry glanced at Fleur, who gave him a look that said, quite clearly, "I have no idea what she's doing either." "All right," Harry said. "What do you need to tell me?" The old woman, Grandmere, studied him for another moment. Then she reached out and placed 2 fingers very lightly against his forearm, just where his sleeve had pushed back from leaning on the rail. Her touch was cool and dry and lasted exactly 3 seconds. When she withdrew her hand, her expression had shifted from weight to something that looked, though Harry couldn't quite believe he was reading this correctly, like grief. "I thought," she said carefully, "that the Argenteau bloodline had ended." "I don't know what that is," Harry said honestly. "No. You would not." She looked past him at the empty stadium below, then back. "You are partly Veela, child. The blood in you is old, older than the name Delacour, older than the coven's current form. It is the blood of the Argenteau line, which was believed extinct for 300 years. She tilted her head slightly. "And yet here you stand. Radiating it like a beacon, completely unaware, watching a Quidditch match." The silence that followed was remarkable, Harry thought, given that there were still several thousand people within earshot. "That's..." He stopped. "Tried again. I'm a wizard. Just a wizard. My mum and dad were, your mother was Lily Evans, born Lily Potter of an old magical line." The old woman's voice was gentle but absolute. "And before her, the line goes further back than the name suggests. Someone in that lineage carried Veela blood, diluted, hidden, perhaps deliberately obscured. But blood remembers, Mr. Potter, even when people forget." She paused. "And yours has not merely remembered. It has woken up." Harry stared at her. Fleur stepped forward slightly. "Grandmere, perhaps we should, sit down, Fleur." Not unkindly, but with the certainty of someone who has never in their life needed to raise her voice to be obeyed. Fleur sat. "Mr. Potter. I have been sensing auras for 60 years. In that time, I have encountered 3 that carried Veela blood above the quarter threshold. You are the 4th, and you are the only one whose aura carries the specific harmonic of the Argenteau royal line." She said it simply. "That is not something I could mistake. It would be like mistaking the sun for a candle." Harry's brain was doing something complicated. He was aware, distantly, of Ron and Hermione a few feet away. Ron had gone very still and Hermione had pulled out a notebook, because Hermione's response to extraordinary information was always to write it down, and of the Delacour women watching him, and of the cooling night air coming up from the emptying stadium. "All right," he said finally. "Let's say you're right. What does that mean? What's the Argenteau line?" "It means," Grandmere said, "that you are not simply the boy who survived. You are also the last heir of a Veela bloodline that predates the founding of Hogwarts. It means that you have power you have not yet touched, because no one ever told you it was there. It means," she paused, and something in her face shifted, became less measured and more raw, "it means I owe you an apology, on behalf of my coven and everyone who should have been watching for you. We failed to find you. We should have. You didn't know I existed." "No. But we should have been looking." She straightened. "We are looking now." What happened next happened fast, the way disasters always do, not a gradual build but a sudden lurch from one reality to another. The screaming started at the far end of the campground, distant enough that it was easy to dismiss as post-match celebration. Then a second wave of it, closer, and the distinctive high crack of spellfire cutting through the dark. Harry was on his feet and moving before he'd consciously decided to move, his wand out and the noise of the camp resolving itself into something organized and terrible, hooded figures, maybe a dozen of them, moving through the tents with casual purpose, sending blasts of fire into canvas and rope, and above them, rising in a column of sickly green light, four figures rotating slowly in the air. The Robertses. The Muggle family from the campground entrance. Harry recognized them because he'd walked past their tent that morning and the youngest kid had been trying to teach himself to juggle with 3 empty bottles and laughing every time he dropped one. The family was upside down now, 50 feet in the air, rotating slowly like ornaments on a horrible mobile, and the figures below were laughing. Harry ran. He was aware, vaguely, that he was running toward the Death Eaters rather than away, and that this was probably what most people would call inadvisable, but the kid with the bottles was up there and Harry's body had simply made the decision without consulting his risk assessment instincts. He'd closed maybe half the distance when something happened that he didn't fully understand until afterward. The magic that rose in him didn't feel like it usually did, the sharp, directed pull of will through wand, it felt like a tide coming in, deep and broad and warm, and it came up from somewhere below his sternum and moved outward through his arm and through his wand, and the spell he'd been planning to cast, a simple finite aimed at whatever was holding the Robertses in the air, came out as something else entirely. Not a flash of color. Not a crack. A wave, visible as a distortion in the air, like heat shimmer, gold-tinged at the edges, that rolled from Harry's wand across the 20 feet between him and the rotating figures and simply cancelled everything. Not just the levitation charm. Every active spell in a 15-foot radius dropped simultaneously. The green column of light snuffed out. The Robertses dropped, 2 feet, before Harry had a second spell up before they'd fallen 3, a cushioning charm he'd learned in second year, and they drifted the rest of the way down like they were settling onto an invisible mattress. The Death Eaters had stopped laughing. Harry stood in the open ground between the tents with his wand up and 8 hooded figures staring at him, and he was 14 years old and not remotely frightened, which surprised him as much as anything. "Who the hell are you?" said one of the figures. "Harry Potter," he said, because that was always the answer. He didn't throw any more spells. He didn't need to. Whatever he'd done a moment ago, whatever that wave was, had drawn the attention of a dozen ministry wizards closing from 3 directions, and the Death Eaters, pragmatic in the way bullies always are, scattered into the dark. There was a stampede of apparition cracks like a string of firecrackers going off, and then they were gone, and Harry was standing in the sudden relative quiet with the Robertses on the ground behind him, confused and frightened but unhurt, and the kid with the bottles staring up at him with wide eyes. Harry lowered his wand. "You're all right," he told the kid. "It's over." The boy nodded, still staring. Behind Harry, from about 30 feet away, came a sound that was not quite a gasp, more like a sharp, involuntary exhale. He turned. Grandmere was standing at the edge of the cleared ground, Fleur and Apollon beside her, and all three of them were looking at him with different expressions, Apollon with something like stunned recognition, Fleur with an expression Harry couldn't catalogue at all, and Grandmere with the look of someone who has been proved right about something they almost hoped they were wrong about. What was that? Ron called from somewhere behind him. Harry, what did you do? Harry looked at his wand. He didn't have a good answer. I'm not sure, he said honestly. That, Grandmere said from across the clearing, with quiet certainty, was Argenteau aura casting. Which has not been seen since the last heir disappeared. She walked toward him, slow and deliberate as a ship changing course. And which confirms everything I told you 20 minutes ago. She stopped in front of him. This close, Harry noticed that her eyes weren't simply gray, there were flecks of gold in them, deep, like something lit from within. You didn't cast that intentionally, she said. No. And yet it was precise. Selective. You canceled targeted magic without touching anything around it. She looked at his wand. Mr. Potter. That was not something your wand did. That was something you did through your wand. There is a significant difference. I've never done anything like that before. You have never needed to before. She looked at him steadily. Or perhaps you have, and the things you have done that seemed like luck were not luck at all. A pause. We need to speak further. Privately, and at length. Tomorrow, if you can manage it. I can manage it, Harry said, without hesitating. She studied him for another beat. Good. You are not what I expected. What did you expect? A child, she said simply. You are that, of course, you are 14 and you don't know what you are yet. But the blood is already speaking. She glanced at Fleur, something passing between them that Harry couldn't read. Fleur will find you in the morning. I trust you will come. Yeah, Harry said. She turned and walked away, and even at 63 in the dark of a chaotic campground, there was something about the way she moved that made the crowd part ahead of her without quite knowing why. Hermione had 17 questions and the discipline to hold most of them until they were back in the Weasley tent, which Harry appreciated more than he could say. Ron, who had no such discipline, started immediately. Veela. Harry, she said you're Veela. But you don't. He made a vague gesture at Harry's general person, apparently indicating that Harry did not conform to his understanding of what Veela looked like. Veela blood doesn't always manifest physically, Hermione said, somewhat absently, because she was already pulling books out of her bag. Especially not in mixed bloodlines. It can lie dormant for generations. There are historical cases, she said. The Argenteau line, Harry said. Does that mean anything to you? Hermione flipped through a slim volume, A History of European Magical Peoples, and found what she was looking for in under a minute, because Hermione was constitutionally incapable of carrying a book she hadn't already read. The Coven of Argenteau, she read. One of the oldest Veela collectives in existence. Based primarily in southern France, with historical territories extending through what is now coastal Spain and northern Morocco. Known for, she ran her finger down the page, aura casting. Which is described here as. She scanned ahead, frowning. The ability to project magical intent as a direct extension of the Veela's natural field rather than through conventional wand work. Theorized to be the original form of spellcasting from which modern wand magic descended. She looked up. Harry. That's what you did, isn't it? When you stopped the Death Eaters. I don't know what I did. That wave you made. That wasn't a standard spell. I've read every finite variation in the library and none of them work like that. She tapped the book. But this describes aura casting as working exactly that way. A broad, precision selective cancellation. You felt it come from, not from a specific thought, but from somewhere lower, Harry said. From my chest. Not from my head. Hermione stared at him for a moment. Then she wrote something down. Brilliant, she said softly, in the tone she usually reserved for extraordinary natural phenomena. Then, more practically, Harry, if she's right about the bloodline, and the fact that you just demonstrated an ability that hasn't been documented since the Argenteau line went extinct 3 centuries ago is fairly compelling evidence, then you need to talk to Dumbledore. I know. And you need to talk to him before he hears it from someone else. I know. And you should probably also, Hermione. Harry put his hand on the book, gently, to stop her turning pages. I'm going to meet Grandmere tomorrow morning. Let's start there. She looked like she had more to say. She always had more to say. But she read something in his expression, the particular steadiness that he'd been aware of all evening, the strange settled quality that had been there since Grandmere touched his arm, and she nodded instead. All right, she said. Start there. Ron was watching Harry with an expression that combined reverence, confusion, and something that looked almost like protectiveness. Are you all right, mate? Harry considered the question honestly. He'd just been told he was the lost heir of an ancient magical bloodline. He'd done magic he didn't understand. He'd stood in front of Death Eaters and not been frightened, which retrospectively seemed like the most significant detail of all. Yeah, he said. I actually am. That wasn't the kind of thing Harry Potter usually said. He was aware of that. But it was also, right now, completely true, a solidity in his center that felt new and old at the same time, like a door he'd always known was there had simply swung open. He slept, and his dreams were full of gold and silver light moving like water, and he woke remembering none of them but feeling, somehow, rested in a way he hadn't been in years. The morning was cool and bright, mist still burning off the lower tents, the campground smelling of smoke and dew and someone's early morning fry-up. Harry left the Weasley tent before anyone else was awake, which took some doing because Fred was a notoriously light sleeper and had an instinct for when something interesting was happening, but Harry moved quietly when he needed to and was out into the open air before the twins stirred. Fleur was waiting for him at the edge of the Delacour family's camping area, several large tents arranged with more elegance than the surrounding chaos, a small conjured garden already blooming beside the entrance, and the smell of proper coffee that made Harry's chest ache slightly with longing. She was wearing a pale grey coat and her silver blonde hair was braided back, and she was reading a small book that she closed when she saw him, standing in one smooth movement. You came, she said. The faint skepticism in it was interesting. Harry got the sense she'd half expected him to find a reason not to. Said I would. She studied him the way her grandmother had, though with more visible effort. Grandmere's assessment had been as effortless and natural as breathing, but Fleur's was deliberate, like someone trying to see something that kept moving. After a moment she gave up on whatever she was looking for and turned toward the largest tent. She has been awake since 4, Fleur said, walking. She told us she knew you would come and that we were to leave her alone with you for an hour. She paused at the tent entrance. My mother is not very happy about that. What do you think? She glanced back at him, briefly. I think Grandmere has never been wrong about a bloodline in her life, and I think whatever happened last night with the Death Eaters means I should probably reserve judgment about what a 14-year-old wizard is capable of. She held the entrance open. After you. The inside of the tent was enormous, undetectable extension charm of considerable sophistication, and arranged as a sitting room with a long wooden table, shelves of bottles and books along one wall, and several comfortable chairs grouped near a window that opened onto a view that was definitely not the Quidditch World Cup campground. Rolling hills, golden in morning light, with what looked like the sea in the far distance. Grandmere was seated at the table with a cup of coffee and several open books, and she looked up when Harry entered with the brisk attention of someone who has been thinking hard for hours and is ready to begin. Sit, she said, gesturing to the chair across from her. Coffee? Please. She poured it herself, which Harry suspected was not standard practice, and slid it across the table. Black, no sugar. He didn't usually take it black, but he tried it and found it was excellent coffee and the absence of sugar didn't matter. Fleur, you may stay if you want, Grandmere said, without looking up from the page she was reading. I know, Fleur said, sitting down at the far end of the table with her book. "What I'm going to tell you," Grandmere said to Harry, "will be strange. Some of it you will not believe. I ask only that you wait until I finish before you decide what to dismiss." She looked at him over the rim of her cup. "Can you do that?" "Yeah." "Good. The Coven of Argenteau has existed for over 1,000 years. In that time, the ruling bloodline, the Argenteau line proper, has always carried what we call the fil d'or, the golden thread. It is not simply Veela blood. It is a specific expression of it, the ability to project aura externally, to read aura in others, and in its fullest expression, to alter aura. Strengthen it. Heal it. In rare cases, break it. She turned a page in one of the books, spun it to face Harry. A detailed illustration, an old woodcut, intricate, showed a figure surrounded by a radiating field that looked unmistakably like what Harry had felt when he'd stopped the Death Eaters. 312 years ago, the last male heir of the Argenteau line, a child of 4 years old, disappeared during a period of violent unrest in Veela territories. His mother's body was found. He was not. She paused. The coven mourned and eventually moved on. The ruling line passed to a cousin branch, our branch, my mother's family, but the fil d'or came with it only partially. We carried Veela blood, yes. But the golden thread was gone. She looked at Harry steadily. Until last night. You think I'm descended from that child, Harry said. I don't think it. I know it. The fil d'or is unmistakable. It is not something that can be approximated or confused with something similar. It is entirely specific. She closed the book. Which means that 4-year-old survived. Was taken somewhere, hidden, his identity obscured. His Veela blood was either dormant in his descendants or deliberately suppressed. She tilted her head slightly. I would want to know who did it. And why? Harry thought about Dumbledore. He wasn't sure why, exactly, but the thought arrived and stayed. What does it mean, he said. Practically. What does it actually mean for me? Practically. She seemed to appreciate the question. It means you have access to a form of magic that operates differently from wand work. More instinctive, more powerful in certain ways, less controllable in others. It means your emotional state directly affects your magical output, which is true of all Veela, but the Argenteau blood makes it more intense. When you are calm, your magic is very precise. When you are angry, she left a diplomatic pause, I imagine things around you have a history of breaking. Harry said nothing, but she read his face with no trouble at all. Yes. As I suspected. A trace of something that might have been dry amusement. It also means that certain creatures and people will respond to you differently. Not like a Veela's natural allure, that is a different mechanism entirely, but a recognition. Animals, in particular. Some humans, those sensitive to magical fields. The dragon, Harry said suddenly. Because he remembered, very clearly, Crumb's firebolt angling toward the snitch, and the Bulgarian team's mascots, the real ones that someone had made the optimistic decision to bring in for the match, and the way the creatures had seemed, just for a moment, to go still as Harry passed their enclosure on the way to his seat. I beg your pardon. The Veela. Beau's Batons brought their Veela dance team. He remembered it. He'd felt, not the same pull everyone else had, that dizzy infatuation. He'd felt something else. Recognition, almost. Like a sound at a frequency he'd always been able to hear but never known the name of. I wondered why it felt different. For me. Grandmere and Fleur exchanged a look. Different how? Fleur asked. She'd abandoned the pretense of reading. Not like. Harry searched for words. Everyone else looked like they were being pulled. I just felt like I understood something. For a second. He paused. And then it stopped. Because they stopped their working, Grandmere said. She sounded deeply satisfied. The aura recognition is instinctive. Veela blood calls to Veela blood. You would not be entranced because you are not beneath it, you are of it. She looked at him. You are the most powerful Veela-blooded individual I have encountered in 60 years of sensing. More powerful, almost certainly, than I am. And I am considered formidable. She said it without ego, as simple fact. What you need is teaching. What I need is time. I have time, Harry said. Not as much as I would like. She set her cup down. You are going to Hogwarts. I do not know what this year will bring. Something flickered behind her eyes, private and sharp, but I know that old blood in a young body will not wait for convenient timing. It will emerge on its own, and better you understand it than find yourself surprised by it. She stood, which apparently signified a shift in the conversation from exposition to practicality, because she moved to one of the shelves and began selecting bottles with quick, certain hands. There is an exercise I want to show you. It will take 20 minutes. After that, you will go back to your friends, and you will not do anything dramatic with what I have taught you until you have had time to practice it. She looked at him over her shoulder. I mean that seriously, Mr. Potter. The aura casting you did last night was instinct. Instinct at that level is extraordinary. But instinct without understanding is a match in a library. I understand. You say that with a confidence I find both reassuring and slightly alarming. Fleur made a small sound at the end of the table that Harry strongly suspected was a suppressed laugh. The exercise was not what Harry expected. He'd anticipated something dramatic, a display of power, concentric rings of silver fire, the sort of thing that showed up in illustrations in advanced defense texts. What Grandmere showed him was this: breathe in, and pay attention to what's between his heartbeat and his magic. The gap. The space where intention lives before it becomes action. Everything you've done with wand work, she said, standing behind him while he sat with his hands on the table, has started in your head. Concept to spell to cast. Very fast, very trained. But the fil d'or doesn't start there. It starts here. She touched the back of his left hand, light as a moth. Feel that? The warmth? He felt it. It was the same warmth from the night before, from the wave that had cancelled the Death Eater's magic, but quieter now, more like an ember than a fire. That is your aura at rest, she said. Learn to feel it at rest, and you will be able to feel when it moves. When it moves without your instruction is when it becomes dangerous. When you can instruct it, when you can feel the difference between resting and ready and active, you will be the most controlled Veela-born practitioner in 3 centuries. They worked in silence for 10 minutes, and Harry discovered 2 things. The first was that the warmth, once he paid attention to it, was always there, not occasional, but constant, a low steady heat he'd been feeling his entire life and categorizing as something else. Magic, maybe. Or anxiety. Or whatever unnamed thing lived in the space between ordinary and extraordinary. The second thing was that when he breathed slowly and let his attention settle on the warmth rather than looking for it, it expanded. Not dramatically. Not with a wave or a flash. Just wider, deeper, the way a room seems larger when you stop rushing through it. Good, Grandmere said quietly, and she sounded genuinely pleased. Very good. You are a natural at the stillness, which is unexpected. I've had a lot of practice being still, Harry said. When you're not supposed to take up space, you get good at it. She said nothing. But she sat down across from him, and he got the sense that the silence was heavy with something she was choosing not to say yet, a grief or a fury held in check by the discipline of many years, and directed somewhere else entirely. We will continue this at Hogwarts, she said at last. Fleur will be there. I will find a way to be nearby. She looked at him steadily. And Harry, it was the first time she'd used his name, I want you to know something. You owe us nothing. The coven, the Argenteau legacy, any of it. You did not ask to be born to it, and the obligations of blood are not the same as the obligations of choice. She held his gaze. Whatever this becomes, it should be because you choose it. Not because an old woman told you what you are. Harry looked at her for a long moment. I'll let you know when I figure out the difference, he said. She studied him, and then something genuinely warm moved through her expression, not grandmotherly softness, nothing so simple as that, but the warmth of someone who has found what they were looking for and is not quite ready to believe it's real. Yes, she said. I expect you will. The Weasley tent when Harry returned was chaos of the comfortable variety. George had burned something on the camp stove, Mrs. Weasley was issuing instructions about packing that nobody was following, and Ron was explaining to Hermione in elaborate detail why the Bulgarian seeker dive had been the greatest single piece of flying he had ever witnessed. A monologue that Hermione was tolerating with the patience of someone who had decided not to interrupt today. Harry sat down with a piece of toast someone had left on the table and watched the familiar noise of it settle around him like a warm coat. Hermione appeared at his elbow. Well? She's right, Harry said. About all of it, I think. Hermione absorbed this. What are you going to do? Harry considered the question. Through the open tent flap, he could see the campground beginning to stir properly, smoke from fires, the distant sound of people beginning the business of departure. Somewhere across the camp, a group of Bulgarian supporters were singing something slow and triumphant. Learn, he said. That's what she wants to teach me, and I think that's the right call. He bit into the toast. Then figure out the rest. Hermione nodded, which meant she had approximately 40 follow-up questions but was choosing to trust his process for now, which was possibly the greatest gift she regularly gave him. Dumbledore needs to know, she said quietly. Yeah, Harry said. He does. And the particular way he said it, not worried, not anxious, not the way 14-year-old Harry Potter would usually have said it, made Hermione look at him sideways for a moment. The steadiness again. That new settled quality. She didn't comment on it. But she filed it away. Outside the tent, the morning burned off the last of its mist, and the Quidditch World Cup campground prepared for the long process of emptying out, and Harry Potter sat with his toast and a quiet ember in his chest and thought about a 4-year-old who had disappeared 300 years ago and survived into a name that the world had written on a gravestone in Godric's Hollow. Blood remembers, she had said. Yeah, Harry thought. He supposed it did. Chapter 2, Old Blood, New Fire. The train back to London smelled like every other Hogwarts Express journey, pumpkin pasties, someone's experimental potion leaking through their luggage, and the particular dusty warmth of old upholstery, but Harry sat by the window and watched the countryside move and felt like he'd come back from somewhere further away than a Quidditch match. Ron was asleep within 20 minutes, which was a Weasley gift Harry had always quietly envied. Hermione had a book open on her knee but her eyes kept moving to Harry rather than the page, which meant she was reading him instead, and he let her, because Hermione's attention was never intrusive. It was just thorough. The books I have aren't very specific about Argenteau aura casting, she said eventually, when she'd apparently decided that pretending to read was no longer worth the effort. I found 3 references in the night before we left. 2 of them are in texts that were published before 1700, so the information is old, Harry said. Old and possibly incomplete. The third is in a Veela cultural history that describes it as theoretically possible but essentially mythical, which given what happened last night is rather unhelpful in retrospect. She closed the book. What I couldn't find any reference to is what it actually feels like from the inside. The practitioner's experience. Harry looked at the window. Outside, fields were giving way to suburbs, the specific grey sprawl of Middle England that meant they were getting closer to London. Like breathing out, he said. But from somewhere you didn't know could breathe. She wrote that down. He didn't mind. What he didn't tell her, not because he wanted to keep it from her but because he hadn't finished thinking about it yet, was that the ember hadn't gone out since the World Cup. Not just present now, the warmth Grandmere had made him conscious of, but awake in some way that felt different from before. More alert. Like a second pulse, lower and slower than his heartbeat, running beneath everything else. He'd been aware of it on the train platform at King's Cross, aware of it through the Muggle tube station, aware of it now as the train rocked northward. He was aware, also, that it had responded to things. Intensified when a loud argument broke out 2 compartments over. Steadied, almost reflexively, when Ron made some sleepy comment and smiled without waking up. Flared briefly and unmistakably when he passed through the King's Cross barrier between platforms 9 and 10, that membrane between the magical world and the Muggle one. Magic, he thought, was already different. Or rather, he was already different inside it. He went back to watching the fields and let the train take him north toward Hogwarts and the beginning of what felt, for the first time in 4 years, like a genuinely new thing. Dumbledore's office smelled like candied violets and something underneath that, old books, old magic, the particular scent of a room that has absorbed decades of powerful spellwork into its stones. Harry had been here before, knew the route past the gargoyle by heart, knew the way the portrait occupants watched him from their frames with varying degrees of alertness and interest. He'd sat in this chair across from Dumbledore's desk 3 times before and always with some flavor of dread preceding the conversation. Not tonight. It was 2 days after the World Cup, early September beginning to settle over Hogwarts in golds and coppers, and Dumbledore was behind his desk with his half-moon glasses on and a cup of tea steaming beside his hand, and he looked at Harry the way he always looked at Harry, that particular quality of attention that was warm and careful and, Harry had always dimly sensed, slightly watchful beneath the warmth. "You wanted to see me, Harry." "Yeah." Harry sat down. "I met someone at the World Cup. Apollon Delacour's grandmother. She told me something about my mother's family." He paused, not for effect but to choose words carefully. "About Veela blood in the Potter line. The Argenteau bloodline specifically." Not much moved in Dumbledore's face. But something did. The smallest possible adjustment around his eyes, not surprise, Harry noted. Not the expression of someone hearing something new. The expression of someone hearing something they expected to hear, sooner or later. "Did she?" Dumbledore said. Harry let the silence sit for a count of 5. "You knew," he said. Dumbledore took his glasses off and set them on the desk with the deliberate care of someone managing themselves. "I suspected," he said. "There is a meaningful difference." "How long?" "Since your first year." He met Harry's gaze steadily, because whatever Dumbledore was, he wasn't someone who looked away when called to account. "The circumstances of how you survived Voldemort's curse that night in Godric's Hollow, the ancient magic your mother invoked, I began to examine it in detail afterward. And there were elements of the magical signature that didn't conform to standard wizarding patterns. Lily's sacrifice was the foundation, that was never in question. But there was something else present, something older and not quite wand-born, that amplified the working into something beyond what any known human magic could achieve. And you thought it might be Veela blood. I thought it might be something in her bloodline that made the magic she invoked land differently than it would have otherwise." "Yes." He folded his hands on the desk. "I want to be honest with you, Harry. I made a choice not to investigate further. My reasoning at the time was that destabilizing your sense of identity with uncertain information could cause more harm than the information itself was worth." A pause. "I am aware that reasoning is more convenient for me than it is satisfying for you." Harry looked at him for a long moment. "I'm not angry," he said, and found that it was true. "But I need you to know that this is the kind of thing I'd rather have." He gestured vaguely at himself. "Information about what I am. Even if it's uncertain. Even if it's strange." He held Dumbledore's gaze. "I can work with strange. I've been working with strange my whole life." Dumbledore studied him. Then something in his expression shifted, an adjustment in the quality of his attention, subtle but genuine, the look of someone recalibrating their understanding of who they're talking to. "Yes," he said quietly. "I'm beginning to see that. Grandmere, Madame Beaumont, wants to be in contact while Fleur is here for the tournament." Harry watched Dumbledore's expression carefully at the mention of the tournament. "She wants to teach me. The aura casting. The Argenteau working. He paused. I'd like to allow that. There will be a tournament, Dumbledore said. The Triwizard. Beau's batons will be present. But Harry, he picked up his glasses again, turned them in his fingers. You should know that I have certain concerns about this year which I am not yet at liberty to share in full. Is it Voldemort? The portrait stirred. Several of the former headmasters woke up. It is always prudent to consider Voldemort when considering anything, Dumbledore said carefully. Yes. Then I'll train, Harry said. Whatever Grandmere can teach me, whatever I can learn about what I actually am, I'll train. He stood up, because the conversation had reached its natural end and he'd gotten what he came for. I'm not hiding it, Professor. I want to be clear about that. If the blood is awake, I'm not going to pretend it isn't. Dumbledore looked at him, this boy who had come in at 14 with the steady eyes of someone twice his age and an absolute absence of the anxious deference that had always characterized their previous conversations. No, he said. I don't suppose you will. Something that might, in another man, have been called pride moved briefly through his expression. Be careful, Harry. Not afraid. Simply careful. Always, Harry said, which was not entirely true but was the right thing to say to end the conversation on good terms, and he went out through the circular door and down the moving staircase and out into the cool September corridor, and the ember in his chest had been steady and even throughout the entire conversation, and that, too, felt like information. The Hogwarts Great Hall on the morning the delegations arrived was performing its best version of organized chaos. Hundreds of students jammed onto the benches with the collective attention span of a very large, very distracted puppy, all of them craning toward the entrance doors with varying degrees of subtlety. The Beau's batons students would come in first. There'd been a rumor, breathlessly circulated, that their flying carriage had already been seen over the Black Lake. Harry ate his breakfast and didn't crane. Ron did enough craning for both of them. Can you feel it? Hermione asked quietly, beside Harry. When they come in. Will you feel it? Probably, Harry said. Grandmere said Veela blood calls to Veela blood. But not the way it affects everyone else. No. Different. He buttered a piece of toast. Recognition rather than, whatever that thing is that makes Ron stare. Ron, across the table, did not appear to have heard this, which was just as well. The doors opened. The Beau's batons students entered in two columns, a precise, elegant procession, pale blue robes, the kind of practiced movement that came from a school with a very different culture of presentation than Hogwarts, and Harry felt it immediately, a harmonic in the warmth in his chest like a tuning fork finding its note. Not overwhelming. Not the dizzy allure that had the boys around him going glassy-eyed. Just a recognition, bone deep and clean. Like. These people carried something related to what he carried, and the blood knew it even when the mind hadn't finished cataloging the information. And then Fleur Delacour walked in at the front of the column, and the recognition was sharper, not just Veela blood but Argenteau blood, diluted in her but present, and for a strange, vertiginous moment Harry saw it the way Grandmere must see things, a thread of gold running through the silver of Fleur's aura, thin but unmistakable. He blinked, and it was gone. Just the great hall, just Fleur walking with her chin up and her silver hair catching the candlelight, very beautiful and very aware of being watched and completely unbothered by it. Their eyes met as she passed the Gryffindor table. She gave him a look that was not quite a nod, just a fractional acknowledgement, the kind that could be dismissed as coincidence if you weren't looking for it, and walked on. Ron came back to himself gradually, like a deep diver resurfacing. She's. He searched for words. Beautiful, Hermione said crisply. Yes. She's also the girl Harry is going to be training with this year, so perhaps we could catalogue that observation and move on. Training with, Ron swiveled to Harry. What? When did that happen? Just now, apparently, Harry said. Hermione had the expression of someone who has decided to manage a situation before it gets complicated, which Harry interpreted as meaning she'd already thought several steps ahead and was implementing preemptively. He found this deeply comforting. The goblet of fire arrived in the Great Hall on the 1st of November, and the whole school responded to it the way the school responded to everything interesting, with a rush of heat and noise and immediate maneuvering. Dumbledore's announcement of the Triwizard Tournament had produced the kind of excitement that made the stones vibrate. Fred and George were already discussing their aging potion strategy in what they clearly believed were subtle tones. Harry stood at the back of the crowd with his hands in his pockets and looked at the goblet. It was beautiful, he thought, in the same way that something genuinely old and genuinely powerful is always beautiful, with no concession to aesthetics, just the raw visual force of concentrated magic made physical. Blue-white flames that burned cold and somehow bright at the same time. The goblet didn't care about the crowd around it. It burned with perfect indifference, waiting. And then something else happened. The warmth in his chest, constant companion now, 3 months into his awareness of it, lurched. Not painfully. It moved the way a compass needle moves, quickly, purposefully, toward something. Toward the goblet. Harry frowned. He pushed closer to the front of the crowd, more curious than anything else, until he was 3 rows from the rope barrier Dumbledore had strung around the goblet at 10 feet distance. From here the flames were genuinely warm, he could feel them on his face, and the warmth in his chest had steadied into something he was learning to read. Not alert and not aggressive. Something more like resonance. 2 things at the same frequency. It feels you, he thought, which was absurd, but also wasn't. He hadn't written his name on a slip of paper. He was 14 and had enough happening this year without adding a magical tournament to the stack. He'd said as much to Ron, who had been baffled and slightly grieved by this decision, and to Hermione, who had agreed and been relieved. He'd told himself he wasn't going to enter. He stood at the barrier and looked at the goblet and felt the peculiar mutual recognition of it, this ancient magical object that predated the current tournament by centuries, burning blue-white and aware in the way that very old magic is sometimes aware, and he thought about Grandmere's words, "Blood remembers," and the ember in his chest burned steadily back at the goblet's fire. "You're not entering," Hermione said from beside him. She'd followed. She usually did. "No," Harry said. "But you feel it." "Yeah." She looked at the goblet, then at Harry. "It responds to you." "I don't know. Maybe." He stepped back from the barrier. "Either way, I'm not entering. I've got enough on." He went back to his room and spent an hour with the breathing exercise Grandmere had shown him, the one about the gap between heartbeat and intention, and afterward he felt cleaner, more settled, the goblet's pull quiet but not gone. The night before Halloween, he slept well. He'd gotten better at sleeping since August, which Hermione had noted clinically and Ron had attributed to the fact that he'd started ignoring more of Malfoy's commentary, but which Harry privately attributed to the steady company of the ember. It was hard to lie awake in existential dread when something in your chest was burning calm and low like a well-banked fire. He woke on Halloween to the feeling of something shifting. Not the goblet, he didn't know that yet. Just a change in the quality of the morning, something taut in the air. He sat up in bed in the grey pre-dawn light of the Gryffindor dormitory, listening to Ron breathe and the wind against the tower windows, and felt the ember flare once, like a candle in a draught, and then steady. He got dressed and went down to breakfast. The goblet's selection happened that evening in the Great Hall, in the specific theatrical silence that Dumbledore understood better than anyone how to create. The flames turned red. Names emerged on charred pieces of parchment, one by one. Victor Crumb. Fleur Delacour. Cedric Diggory. The Hogwarts champion, and the crowd erupted for him, and Cedric stood with a dazed smile and the particular expression of someone who got what they wanted and is only now computing the weight of it. 3 champions. Dumbledore declared the goblet extinguished. The hall began to buzz with the specific celebratory noise of a school that has just assigned its representative and begun to identify with that person's future glory. And then the goblet flared. Not red, not the selection color. Something else. Blue-white again, its original cold flame, somehow brighter than it had been at any point during the selection process. Brighter and larger, filling the space above the stone cup with something that looked, Harry thought from halfway up the Gryffindor table, less like flame and more like light. Pure, sourceless light. A fourth piece of parchment rose from the flame. Dumbledore caught it. He looked at it. His expression did the thing it almost never did, it went carefully, completely neutral. Then he read the name. Harry Potter. The silence was so complete that Harry heard someone's fork hit their plate 3 tables away. Then everyone turned to look at him, and he was already looking at Dumbledore, because the thing in his chest had gone very still the moment the goblet flared, and he needed to understand what that meant before he decided what to say. Dumbledore met his eyes over the length of the great hall. I didn't enter, Harry thought. You know I didn't enter. And whatever just happened wasn't the goblet making a mistake. Harry, Dumbledore said, with a calm that was doing a lot of work. Please come forward. Harry got up. He was aware of the weight of several hundred pairs of eyes, of Ron's wide-eyed stare and Hermione's urgent exhale beside him, of Draco Malfoy's poisonous delight 2 tables over and Cedric Diggory's startled look from across the room. He walked toward the front of the hall with his hands at his sides and the ember in his chest burning steadily, not distressed, not excited, attentive, he thought. Like it had been expecting this. He stopped in front of Dumbledore. Dumbledore looked at him for a moment that was, Harry thought, longer than strictly necessary for a headmaster managing a hall full of students. The door on the right, Dumbledore said quietly. With the other champions. All right, Harry said. He went through the door. The room beyond was warm, a large stone antechamber with a fire going in the grate and 3 people who all looked at him when he entered with varying degrees of surprise, suspicion, and assessment. Victor Crumb, arms folded, was watching him with the same cool professional attention he'd given the Quidditch pitch. Cedric Diggory, still slightly dazed, managed a nod. Fleur Delacour looked at Harry with an expression that was several things at once, recognition, concern, and underneath both of those, something sharpening. She reached up and touched the thin silver chain at her throat, a gesture so brief that Harry almost missed it. He'd seen that chain. Grandmere had put it there at the World Cup before the Delacours left, some kind of ward or signal. He'd been told it would warm if Harry's aura was in distress. The way Fleur's fingers dropped from it and her eyes went carefully neutral told him it wasn't warming. He was not in distress. You are not supposed to be here, Fleur said. No, Harry agreed. Did you enter? No. She studied him, then looked at the door, then back at him. Grandmere said this was possible. Not the tournament, but something like this. Being selected for something you did not choose. Her voice was quiet. She said your blood carries the fill door so strongly that old magical objects will respond to it without prompting. So the goblet just selected me. The goblet is 700 years old and was created by a Veela craftsman in the Argenteau tradition, Fleur said. It recognizes its own. She paused. That is my theory. I am working on it. Cedric cleared his throat. I'm sorry, did you just say the goblet is Veela made? Most of the foundational magical objects in European wizarding culture are, Fleur said, with the slightly exhausted tone of someone accustomed to this being news. The brooms. The mirror of Eriste. The sorting hat. Veela craftwork predates most of what people call wizard tradition by 4 centuries. Crumb had been listening to this silently. Now he looked at Harry with an expression that had shifted, not suspicious, but calculating. Victor Crumb, Harry was already learning, was excellent at recalibrating quickly. It was the same quality that made him a great seeker. You are the boy from the campground, Crumb said. His voice was low and accented, each word weighted. Who stopped the Death Eaters? Yeah. What you did. The wave. A pause. I was watching from the Quidditch tents. I have never seen a wizard do that. I've never done it before. Crumb made a sound that was possibly acknowledgement, possibly skepticism, and possibly something in between, and looked back at the fire. The door opened and the adults came in, Dumbledore, Maxime, Karkaroff, Bagman, Crouch, and the conversation that followed was loud and unpleasant and largely irrelevant to Harry, because the outcome had already been decided. The goblet's decision was binding. For champions now, an unprecedented year, and somewhere in the noise of it Harry caught Karkaroff's eyes and noted the calculation in them, and next to Karkaroff caught the face of Bartemius Crouch Sr., who was watching Harry with an expression that was very carefully composed and still managed to leak something beneath its surface, not surprise, and not worry, and not any of the appropriate emotions for a ministry official confronting an irregular magical selection. It looked like satisfaction. Harry filed that away. He was getting better at filing things away. He found Fleur afterward, in the corridor outside the antechamber, when the delegations had broken apart and the adults were deep in procedural argument. "Grandmere," Harry said. "Is she coming?" "She sent an owl this morning," Fleur said. "She said something was going to happen at Hogwarts this week. She did not specify." A pause. "She is often infuriating like that. She knew about the tournament. She mentioned it, at the World Cup, she said she had concerns." Fleur turned to look at him directly. In the corridor's torchlight she looked less like the composed, slightly remote beauty of the great hall entrance and more like someone managing a great deal of thought behind a careful face. "She said to me, when we were packing to come to Hogwarts, she held my hands and she said, 'Fleur, the boy is walking into something and he will not see it coming because he does not yet know his own weight.' I did not fully understand it then." She paused. "I think I am beginning to." "What's his own weight?" Harry asked. Fleur looked at him steadily. "When you walked into that room just now, past Krum and Cedric and the fire in the grate changed color. Just for a moment. Blue-white." She glanced at the door behind them. "Objects that respond to Veela blood don't do that for ordinary people, Harry. They do it for the Argenteau line. They do it for someone whose aura is so dense and so old that fire itself takes note." She paused. "That is your weight. You are not simply strong. You are old. Ancient, in the way blood is ancient. And you are going to have to learn very quickly how to walk with that and not knock things over." Harry was quiet for a moment. Then, the fire changed. "Yes. Did Krum see?" "Yes." "And Cedric?" "He was looking at you, not the fire. But he noticed you noticing something." She tilted her head slightly. "Cedric Diggory is more perceptive than people give him credit for." "Yeah," Harry said. "I got that impression." He looked at the door, then back at Fleur. "Grandmere. When she comes, I want to tell her about Crouch. Crouch Sr. The ministry official. The way he looked at me when the goblet selected me. It wasn't the right expression." Harry met her eyes. "Someone fixed it. The selection. I don't know who and I don't know why yet, but I know what a genuine surprise looks like and that wasn't it." Fleur studied him for a long moment. Her expression had gone very still, not cold, but careful. The way someone looks when they are taking something seriously and not performing it. "I will tell Grandmere," she said. "Come to the Beauxbatons common quarters tomorrow evening. We will begin the practice she set out for you. The breathing exercise." That was the first step. She turned to go, then paused. "Harry. The Phil door. She told me what it means, fully, when the bloodline is at full expression." She met his eyes over her shoulder. "The last Argenteau heir who carried it at this strength stopped a war. Single-handedly. 300 years ago, before he disappeared." She paused. "I think that is also what Grandmere means by your weight." She walked away down the corridor and left Harry standing in the torchlight, and the ember in his chest burned steadily, and the fire in the grate behind him had gone back to its ordinary orange gold, but for just a moment when he turned and looked at it through the gap in the door, he could have sworn he saw blue at its edges. Hermione was in the library when he found her, which was the only place she ever was when she had a problem to solve, and she had 3 books open and her notes spread in a fan around her and the look of someone who had been here for 2 hours already. "The goblet," Harry said, sitting across from her. 17th century construction, Veela tradition craftwork, 7 known instances of irregular selection behavior throughout its documented history. She pointed to the book on the left. None of the previous irregular selections were accidental, Harry. Every single one of them was either magically coerced, someone tampered with the goblet itself, or the goblet selected someone because it responded to something in them that superseded the standard entry conditions. She looked up. "Given what you are, it could be both. Meaning someone might have tampered with it and the goblet responded to my blood. Meaning the tampering might have been designed to use your blood as the mechanism. If someone knew what you were, or suspected, they could have modified the goblet's selection parameters to key on Argenteau aura rather than submitted names." She tapped her pen against her notebook. "Which would mean whoever entered you knew about the bloodline." Harry thought about Crouch's expression again. "Voldemort," he said quietly. Hermione went very still. "You think he knows?" "I think his people at the ministry might. I think if there are records anywhere of the Argenteau line, and of a child who disappeared 300 years ago," he leaned forward, "Voldemort would have been the kind of person to find those records. Before he fell, he was obsessed with old blood and old power. What better reason to put the Argenteau heir in a tournament than to," he stopped. "To get to you," Hermione finished softly. "At the end of the tournament. When the cup transports the winner." Her eyes went wide. "Harry, the Triwizard Cup is a portkey. It always has been. That's documented. The champions portkey to their victory celebration at the host country capital. Or to wherever someone's reset the destination." They looked at each other across the books and notes. "We need to tell Dumbledore," Hermione said. "We need more than a theory," Harry said. "We need something specific." Crouch's expression isn't evidence. He thought for a moment. "But it's a direction." He looked at the books around her. "Find me everything on Triwizard Cup portkey mechanics. And anything you can get on ministry security surrounding the goblet." Hermione was already pulling a new sheet of parchment toward her. "Obviously," she said, which was her way of indicating that she'd thought of it before he said it. Harry leaned back in his chair and let the quiet of the library settle around him, and thought about a 4-year-old boy who had survived something he wasn't supposed to survive, and grown up through generations of forgetting into a 14-year-old who sat in a library at Hogwarts and felt, for the first time in his life, like he was running toward something rather than just managing what came at him. The ember burned. Low and warm and awake. He was ready, he thought, to learn what he was. He was also, entirely separately, beginning to understand that someone had been trying to make sure he never got the chance. That was going to be a problem for them. 3 days later, a snowy white owl that was not Hedwig arrived at his window at 5:30 in the morning, carrying a small sealed letter with no name on the outside, just a symbol Harry had seen once before, on the clasp of Grandmere's cloak at the World Cup. A stylized silver thread woven into a circle. The Argenteau seal. He opened it. "The tournament is compromised. Do not trust the tasks as presented. The first task has been changed from its original design. I have the original specification and what you will face is not it. Come to the Beauxbatons carriage tonight. Bring no one else. I will explain everything. Come at midnight. The old blood is awake and it has made you a target. Time to make them regret that." A.B. Harry folded the letter carefully, put it in the inner pocket of his robes, and went down to breakfast. He was not afraid. He was, if he was honest, more awake than he'd felt in years. Chapter 3, Beauxbatons knows. The Beauxbatons carriage was bigger on the inside than it looked from the grounds, which Harry had expected, but the interior was nothing like the Weasley tent's comfortable chaos. Everything in it was precise. Pale wood paneling, shelves of glass bottles arranged by color rather than label, a long central table with a surface so smooth it reflected the candlelight like still water. The carriage smelled of something floral and something older underneath, the way old stone churches smell of incense and centuries simultaneously. Grandmere was seated at the far end of the table with 3 candles burning in front of her and a map spread out that Harry recognized, with a start, as Hogwarts. Not a student's copy, something older, hand-drawn, with annotations in a script he didn't immediately recognize. "Close the door," she said, without looking up. Harry closed it. The noise of the November grounds, whined off the lake, the distant sounds of the castle settling, cut off completely. Fleur was already seated to Grandmere's left, her hands wrapped around a ceramic cup, watching Harry find a chair with the expression she'd been wearing increasingly often around him, attentive, slightly guarded, like someone trying to get an accurate read on a thing that keeps being more complicated than expected. "Sit," Grandmere said, and Harry sat. She finished reading whatever she was reading on the map, then looked up. She looked tired, he thought, not physically, but in the way people look tired when they've been worried for a long time and have recently found out the worry was justified. "You read my letter," she said. "Yeah. Good. Then you know that this conversation is not about bloodlines or heritage or the Phil d'Or." She folded the map with efficient hands. "It is about the fact that someone at this school, or connected to this school, has modified a 700-year-old magical artifact to target you specifically, and I want you to understand exactly what that means before you walk into the first task." "How do you know the task was changed?" Harry asked. She reached into the leather satchel beside her chair and produced a roll of parchment, aged to the color of old cream, covered in dense handwriting. "The Coven of Argenteau was present at the original creation of the Triwizard Tournament. We contributed 3 of the 7 founding champions in the tournament's first iteration, 1200 years ago. We have the original task specifications." She slid the parchment across the table to Harry. "Read the first task." Harry unrolled it carefully. The handwriting was cramped but legible, an older form of French that he couldn't read, but below it, in someone's more recent hand, a translation. He read the translation. The first task, in the original specification, was described as a test of ingenuity under pressure. A champion was presented with a sealed chamber and a riddle. No magic. No wands. Pure problem-solving. Harry looked up. "What is the first task actually going to be?" he asked. "Dragons," Fleur said. Her voice was entirely level, but her hands tightened slightly around her cup. "Real ones. A nesting Hungarian horntail, a common Welsh green, a Swedish shortsnout, and a Chinese fireball." Grandmere looked at him steadily. "Each champion is assigned one by lot. The objective, as it has been modified, is to retrieve a golden egg from beneath the nesting dragon." Harry processed this. "When you say nesting, she believes the egg is hers," Grandmere said. "She will defend it with everything she has. The task is not a puzzle. It is designed to be physically brutal, dangerous in ways that pure spellwork cannot easily counter, and psychologically destabilizing." A pause. Someone wanted this task to be a trial by violence rather than a trial by wit. They changed it specifically to increase the mortality risk for a contestant who responds better to instinct than planning, Harry finished. Grandmere looked at him. "I was going to say for a contestant who is not yet fully in command of their more unusual abilities. But yes. The logic is similar." She folded her hands on the table. "Whoever modified the task knows what you are. They know that Argenteau aura casting is instinct-driven and that in a high-stakes physical confrontation, an untrained practitioner might reach for the old blood rather than wand work, and the result at this stage of your development could be, uncontrolled," Fleur said quietly. "Spectacular and uncontrolled," Grandmere corrected. "Which would expose the bloodline publicly, in a crisis context, in front of an international audience, before you have any framework to manage the political consequences." Her eyes were very clear. "Someone wants you seen, Harry. They want you visible and struggling and raw. They want you known before you're ready to control the knowing." Harry sat with that for a moment. Or they want me dead and they're hedging their bets, he said. Both can be true. Right. He rolled the parchment back up, not because he was done with the information but because his hands needed something to do. So what's the actual plan? Grandmere turned to Fleur. Tell him what we've worked out, Fleur's grandmother said. Fleur set down her cup. We have 3 weeks before the first task. In that time, we need to accomplish 2 things simultaneously. She held up one finger. First, your aura casting needs to reach a functional level of control. Not full mastery, that takes years. But controlled enough that if it activates under stress, it does what you intend rather than what your instincts push toward. A second finger. Second, you need to have a wand-work strategy for the dragon encounter that doesn't rely on the aura casting at all, so that if the old blood does surge, it's because you chose it, not because your back was against a wall and your body made the decision for you. You said I shouldn't be afraid to use it. I said you shouldn't hide it, Grandmere corrected. There is a difference between choosing to use your full power and being forced to it before you're ready. The first is strength. The second is just a different kind of vulnerability. She leaned forward slightly. You will face that dragon on your terms, Harry. Whatever that looks like. But it should be your terms. Harry nodded slowly. 3 weeks. Every evening we can manage, Fleur said. Here or on the grounds, wherever's available. And the other champions? Grandmere was quiet for a moment. Cedric Diggory, she said. What do you think of him? Honest, Harry said, without hesitating. Fair. He offered to tell me about the task once, before we knew the tasks, just because he thought I'd been put in the tournament without a fair shot. He paused. He meant it. Tell him about the dragons, Grandmere said. Not about the rest. Not yet. But tell him what he's walking into. He deserves to prepare. Harry looked at her. You've met him once. I haven't met him at all. But you told me in 6 words what I needed to know about his character. She picked up her own cup, which Harry hadn't noticed until now. The Veela tradition has a concept, vérité de sang. Blood truth. The idea that when you carry the fil d'or, your instinctive read of a person's nature is usually accurate because you're reading their aura, not their words. You have been doing this your whole life without knowing it. She looked at him over the rim. The people you have trusted instinctively. The ones you have distrusted. Review those choices in your memory. I think you will find your record is significantly better than chance. Harry thought about Ron, the compartment on the Hogwarts Express in first year, a red-haired boy with a smudge on his nose and a genuine laugh, and the immediate sense of this one. About Hermione, her annoying bossiness that he'd seen passed on the second day to the fierce loyalty underneath. About Quirrell and the wrongness he'd felt around the man from the first moment that he'd attributed to shyness and never trusted. About Snape, whom he'd distrusted from day one for reasons he'd never quite been able to articulate. About Dumbledore, whom he trusted but no longer deferred to, and the sense that this was the correct calibration. Yeah, he said quietly. Good. Grandmere set her cup down. Then trust it going forward. And begin to notice that you are doing it. Instinct brought to awareness becomes strategy. She stood, which in the Beauxbatons carriage had the quality of a meeting being formally concluded. Tonight we begin the second stage of the aura practice. It is less comfortable than the breathing exercise. Define less comfortable. You will need to access the warmth deliberately rather than waiting for it to arise. Which means I will need to give you something to react to. She said it with perfect composure. I am going to frighten you. Not seriously. But enough to trigger the instinctive response, and then we will work on the gap between the trigger and the output, the pause where you can choose. Harry looked at her. You're going to frighten me, he said. Yes. And you don't think I'll just lose control and aura blast the interior of my carriage? Something crossed her face, not quite amusement, but adjacent. If you do, I will repair it. But I don't think you will. The fil d'or at your level is not reactive in the destructive sense, it is reactive in the directed sense. When you stopped the Death Eaters, you didn't flatten the campground. You cancelled specific magic with precision. She paused. You are more controlled than you know. We are simply going to make the control conscious. Fleur stood as well, gathering her cup and her notes. Then, very briefly, she looked at Harry with something in her expression that wasn't the careful assessment he'd gotten used to, something more direct. You'll be fine, she said. Not reassuringly. Just as fact. Harry found, oddly, that this was the most effective comfort she could have offered him. He stood up. Let's do it then. What Grandmere did to frighten him was not what he expected. He'd anticipated something dramatic, a conjured threat, maybe, or a sudden flash of something terrifying. What she did instead was stand 5 feet in front of him, close her eyes, and let her own aura out. He felt it before he saw it, a pressure in the air like the moment before a lightning strike, and then a wave of presence that was enormous and old and utterly unmoved by anything he might think or feel about it. The carriage didn't change. The candles didn't flicker. But the space between them became suddenly, comprehensively occupied, and what occupied it was something ancient and genuinely, quietly formidable in a way that had nothing to do with threat. It was terrifying because it was not angry and not hostile and still absolutely overwhelming. The way standing at the edge of a cliff is terrifying not because the cliff wants to hurt you but because of what it simply is. The warmth in Harry's chest surged. He felt it go from the steady low burn to something that wanted to be a roar in approximately 1 second, and he felt, very clearly, the moment where it could have become that wave from the World Cup, broad and releasing and uncontrolled, and he also felt, for the first time consciously, the pause. The gap between trigger and output. The place where choice lived. He breathed. It was not comfortable. The warmth was pressing outward from his sternum like something that wanted expansion, and containing it was like standing in water up to his neck and being told to stay still. But he breathed, and held the gap, and said, very clearly inside himself, not yet. The wave didn't come. The warmth stayed. Held, contained, present. Grandmere opened her eyes and pulled her aura back in like someone drawing a curtain, and the carriage returned to its ordinary dimensions in the space of a breath. She looked at him. How long did you hold it? She asked. Harry checked internally. 3 seconds. Maybe 4. In optimal conditions, with months of practice, a trained Argenteau practitioner can hold that pause for as long as they choose. She paused. 4 seconds is remarkable for 3 months of awareness and approximately 12 minutes of practice. She sat back down. We will do this again. The goal is not to suppress the surge but to contain it long enough to aim it. She looked at her notes. By the time of the first task, I want you to be able to sustain the pause for 30 seconds under active pressure. That doesn't sound like enough time to actually. 30 seconds, Fleur said from the side of the room, with a smile that was slight and dry, is long enough to end most dangerous situations if you know what you're doing. She paused. It is also longer than most people can hold their nerve under that kind of pressure. 30 seconds is significant. We will build to it, Grandmere said, already writing something. Again. Ready? Harry planted his feet. Yeah, he said. He told Cedric the next morning, on the grounds by the lake where the morning mist was still heavy and the water moved in slow pewter ripples. Cedric was an early riser, which Harry had learned through the useful method of also being an early riser, and they'd fallen into a routine of occasionally sharing the same section of lakeshore at 6:30 without it requiring explanation or conversation. Dragons, Cedric said. 4 of them. Nesting. 1 per champion. Harry looked out at the water. You're going to need something that gets you clear of the flame before you go for the egg. Cedric was quiet for a moment. He was sitting on a flat rock at the water's edge with his elbows on his knees, and he was doing the thing Harry had noticed him doing in the champion's antechamber, the quick, precise internal processing that showed on his face as almost nothing but showed in his eyes as a great deal. "How do you know?" he asked. Not accusatory. Just asking. "Someone told me." Someone who had reason to know. Harry paused. "I'm not going to explain the full thing right now, but the source is solid." "And you're telling me?" "Yeah. Even though we're competing against each other. You're a Hogwarts champion. Harry made a gesture that covered the general absurdity of his situation, "whatever I am. But you didn't sign up for something that was supposed to have a dragon in it, and you should know." He paused. "Also you offered me help before you knew I'd need it, just because it seemed fair. I figured I owed you one." Cedric looked at him with the expression of someone recalibrating who they're talking to. It was, Harry reflected, an expression he seemed to be getting a lot this year. He wasn't sure if that was because he'd changed or because people were only now paying close enough attention to see what had been there all along. "A dragon," Cedric said again. More to himself than to Harry. He was already thinking. "The summoning charm. If I can get my broom in from the castle, that's not bad," Harry said. "What will you do?" Harry thought about Grandmere's carriage, about the surge and the pause and the 30-second goal, about a wave that was gold-tinged at the edges and cancelled targeted magic with precision. "Something different," he said. Cedric looked at him sideways. He had the particular intelligence of someone who knows when they're not getting the full picture and decides not to push, partly courtesy and partly the instinct that sometimes the partial picture is all you need. "All right," he said simply. They sat in the mist for a while after that, two 15-year-olds on a Scottish lakeshore in November, and the silence between them had the quality of something being built. Not a grand friendship, not yet, but the early architecture of one, laid in the pragmatic honesty of two people who decided, without ceremony, that they were on the same side. 3 days into the evening training sessions, Fleur started joining the exercises rather than observing them. It happened without discussion. Grandmere had been running Harry through a variation of the pause practice, holding the warmth steady while tracking a moving target, a small enchanted light that Grandmere sent in unpredictable arcs around the carriage, and Fleur, who'd been reading at the end of the table, had simply set her book down and said, "Can I try?" Grandmere hadn't looked up. "You were wondering when you'd ask," she said. "I was trying not to be obvious about it." "You weren't." She gestured at the space beside Harry. "Stand there. The fil d'or is diluted in you, but it is present, and if Harry is going to be working with it, it will be useful for him to feel the difference between a strong expression and a partial one. Calibration." Fleur stood beside Harry, 3 feet of space between them, and Grandmere sent the enchanted light moving again. Harry tracked it easily now, his awareness of it was sensory in a way that had nothing to do with sight, the warmth in his chest moving like a compass needle toward the light's position without requiring his eyes to follow it. The control was getting better. Not effortless yet, but no longer the drowning sensation of the first session. Beside him, he was aware of Fleur's aura in the same peripheral way, warm and silver, not the gold and silver of a full Argenteau expression but something related, the way a song is related to its original key. She was concentrating hard, the effort visible in the slight set of her jaw, and her partial fil d'or was doing something interesting, it was smoothing the edges of Harry's awareness, the way a tone and its harmonic make each other clearer. "You feel that?" she said quietly, without looking at him. "Yeah. What does it feel like?" He thought about it. "Like everything slightly more in focus." She turned her head slightly. "For me, your aura feels like standing next to something that generates heat. Not uncomfortable. Just, present." A pause. "Grandmere's is like that but much more so." "Yours is," she stopped. "What?" "Warmer," she said simply. Then looked back at the light. Grandmere sent the light in a sudden sharp spiral and both of them tracked it, and the warmth in Harry's chest surged briefly and then held, contained, aimed at the light, the 30-second goal achieved in the abstract at least, the control real and sustained. Fleur's aura flared briefly alongside his and then steadied, and the combination of the two together in the closed space of the carriage made the candle flame stretch upward for just a moment, drawn by something in the air. Grandmere watched all of this without expression. Then she pulled the light back and extinguished it. "Good," she said. She said it simply, without elaboration, but she also said it to both of them. Not just Harry. The problem with Draco Malfoy was that he was predictable in his timing and unpredictable in his methods, which made him simultaneously easy to anticipate and difficult to prepare for specifically. Harry had mostly been ignoring him since September, which drove Malfoy absolutely wild with the special fury of someone accustomed to getting a reaction and finding none available. Harry had discovered, in the months since the World Cup, that whatever the ember in his chest was doing to his general equilibrium, one of its clearest effects was on his patience for Malfoy's particular brand of performance anxiety dressed as cruelty. It was simply very hard to feel threatened by someone whose aura read as frightened underneath every word. Not that Harry was trying to read Malfoy's aura. He mostly wasn't. But the vérité de sang thing Grandmere had described, the automatic background processing of other people's magical signatures, didn't switch off, and what he got from Malfoy was a consistent picture of someone who was afraid and covering it with venom. It made the venom harder to take seriously. The morning the support Cedric Diggory badges appeared, Harry walked past Malfoy in the corridor with Ron and Hermione, caught the flash of satisfaction on Malfoy's face as he pressed the badge and it changed from support Cedric Diggory to Potter Stinks, and felt the surge of the familiar old anger, and then, underneath it, felt the ember pulse once, warm and deliberate, and the anger passed. "Nice badge," Harry said, not stopping. Malfoy blinked. That was not the reaction he'd designed for. "Potter, seriously. The craftsmanship is good. If you didn't have such poor taste and content you could probably sell them." Harry kept walking. "Tell your father I said hello." Behind him, he heard Malfoy making sounds that suggested considerable internal turmoil, and Ron beside him was practically vibrating with suppressed delight, and Hermione was doing her best to maintain a neutral expression and failing slightly. That was, Ron said quietly, once they were round the corner, extremely satisfying to witness. "He looks frightened," Harry said. "Malfoy? He's furious, underneath." Harry glanced back the way they'd come. His father's connected to what happened at the World Cup. Lucius Malfoy was there that night. I saw him at the edges of the crowd before the ministry arrived. And the badge thing, the tournament coverage, all the interference, he paused. "Someone in Malfoy Sr.'s circle knows exactly who put my name in the goblet. And Draco knows his father's involved in something, and he's scared of what happens if it goes wrong." Hermione had stopped walking. She was staring at him. "Harry. How do you know all of that from a badge?" "I don't," Harry said. "From his face and the badge and 3 months of watching him. But the scared part, that one I'm sure of." He started walking again. "Keep an eye on him. Not the badge stuff. What he's doing when he thinks nobody's watching." Hermione was writing something in her notebook before he'd finished the sentence. 2 weeks before the first task, Grandmere had a visitor. Harry knew this because he arrived at the carriage for the evening session to find a second woman there, seated at the table with a cup of tea and the composed, measuring expression of someone conducting an evaluation. She was perhaps 40, with Veela bright features and the kind of stillness that wasn't restful. It was the stillness of something held in check. "Harry," Grandmere said, "this is Counselor Mireille Vos. She is a senior member of the Coven of Argenteau." Harry looked at Vos. She looked at Harry. Her aura read as sharp and controlled and fundamentally skeptical, the way certain ministry officials did, not malicious, but deeply invested in having her existing conclusions confirmed. "Sit down, Mr. Potter," Vos said. Her accent was stronger than Grandmere's. "I will not take much of your time." Harry sat. Fleur sat beside him with the particular alertness of someone who is ready for a conversation to go wrong. "The Coven," Vos said, "is not a unified organization. I want you to understand this from the beginning. There are those within it who received Adele's news about the Argenteau bloodline with hope. She set her cup down. There are those who received it with doubt. And there are those who received it with concern. Which are you? Harry asked. Concern, she said. I want to explain why, because I think you deserve an honest account rather than a political performance. She folded her hands on the table. If you are what Adele believes you are, the genuine Argenteau heir, the Phil d'Or in full expression, then you are also the most politically significant Veela-blooded individual in 300 years. There are factions within the coven and outside it who will want to use that. To claim it, to control it, to channel it toward their own agendas. A pause. My concern is not that you are dangerous. My concern is that you will be made dangerous by people who see in you an instrument rather than a person. Harry looked at her steadily. That's a fair concern. Something in her expression shifted, not warm, not yet, but recalibrated. You're not going to argue with me. No. You're not wrong. He leaned forward slightly. But I'll tell you what I told Grandmere at the World Cup, whatever this becomes is because I choose it. Not because someone tells me what I am and expects me to conform to it. He held her eyes. I'm not an instrument. I was one for a long time and I've decided I'm done with that. Voss studied him for a long moment. Then she looked at Grandmere. He's real. Yes, Grandmere said. She sounded like she'd been waiting for this conclusion. The coven will need to be managed, Voss said. Back to Harry now, businesslike and direct. There are 3 elders in particular who will push for formal recognition of your status, which means a ceremonial claim on your time and allegiance. I would advise, I'll listen to them, Harry said. I'll talk to them. I'll be respectful. He paused. I won't be managed. Not by them either. Voss blinked. Then, to Harry's complete surprise, the corner of her mouth moved in what was definitely the beginning of a smile before she suppressed it. No, she said. I can see that. She stood, straightening her robes. I came to assess whether Adele's enthusiasm had led her to overstate the case. It has not. She picked up her tea. I will manage the coven elders. You manage your tournament. And we will speak again when all of this is less immediately on fire. She looked at Grandmere. Literally, if the dragon task proceeds as described. The dragon task, Grandmere said, will not proceed as whoever designed it intended. Voss looked at Harry. No, she said. I don't imagine it will. She walked to the door of the carriage, stopped with her hand on it. Mr. Potter. There is an elder named Bertrand Castle. You will hear from him before the first task. He is the one who is not merely concerned, he is opposed. His reasons are complicated and not purely malicious, but his methods are not gentle. She looked over her shoulder. I tell you this not to frighten you. I tell you because you should know what's coming. I appreciate that, Harry said genuinely. She studied him one more time, that measuring quality, looking for the gaps between what he projected and what he was, and apparently found the gap absent, because she nodded once and went out the door. The carriage was quiet for a moment. She liked you, Fleur said. She was assessing me. She liked you while assessing you. With Mireille Voss those are not the same event. Fleur looked at Grandmere. Who is Castle? An elder of the coven's northern branch, Grandmere said, returning to her papers. He believes that the Argenteau bloodline, if genuinely extant, should be reintegrated into the coven's formal structure under coven law. Which would place Harry under coven authority. She looked up. He is not a villain. He is a traditionalist who genuinely believes the old structures exist for good reasons. But his version of protecting the bloodline looks a great deal like controlling it. And if I don't want to be under coven authority? Harry asked. Then we have a very interesting disagreement, Grandmere said. Which I am prepared to have on your behalf, if needed. I can have my own interesting disagreements, Harry said. Grandmere looked at him over her papers. Yes, she said. I know. That is both the reassuring and the slightly alarming thing about you. She turned a page. Shall we practice? The 30-second hold under dual pressure. I think tonight we try 4 separate stimuli simultaneously. Harry cracked his knuckles. Let's go, he said. It was Crumb who surprised him most, in the end. He appeared at the door of the carriage on a Thursday night 3 days before the task, which was not a visiting hour and not an arrangement anyone had made, and he knocked 3 times in the manner of someone who has decided to do something and is not going to second-guess the decision. Harry opened the door, because he'd been the first to hear the knock. Crumb stood on the steps in a heavy Bulgarian cloak, his dark brows pulled together and his expression doing the thing Harry had clocked at the World Cup, processing, precise, not giving anything away until it was processed. I want to talk, Crumb said. Harry stepped aside to let him in. Grandmere looked at Crumb the way she looked at everything, with full, unhurried attention. Crumb looked back at her with the steady awareness of someone who could recognize power when it was in the room. Madam, he said, with a nod that was European and genuine. Mr. Crumb. She gestured to a chair. Sit. There is coffee. Crumb sat. He looked at Harry. I have been watching you for 2 weeks, he said. In the library, on the grounds. I have been watching how you move and where your attention goes. He paused. I also have a source inside the task preparation committee. He told me what the first task is. Dragons, Harry said. You already know. Yeah. Crumb was quiet for a moment. My headmaster told me this morning that I am to perform well and that the Durmstrang honor depends on my result, and that I should not involve myself in the politics of the other champions. He paused. I thought about that for 6 hours. Another pause. Then I came here. Harry looked at him. Why? Because you stopped the Death Eaters at the World Cup, and the way you did it told me something about what you are, and people who are that thing do not get put into tournaments accidentally. Crumb met his eyes with the directness of someone who had decided not to be careful. Someone wanted you here. In this tournament, in this year. I want to know why, because if the answer is what I think it is, then the people who arranged it are also the people my headmaster has been meeting with privately since September. The carriage went very quiet. Harry looked at Grandmere. She was watching Crumb with an expression that had moved significantly along the spectrum towards something warmer. Karkaroff, Harry said. Crumb said nothing. Which was an answer. He's been meeting with someone from the ministry, Harry said. Or someone connected to Voldemort through the ministry. Crumb held perfectly still at the name. Not the usual flinch. More like someone holding a position under pressure. I cannot prove this, Crumb said. But yes. I have heard the name spoken. Not clearly. Not as an admission. But enough. He looked at Harry steadily. I am not your enemy. I want to be very clear about this. I know, Harry said. He'd known it from the World Cup, from the way the Seeker dive had felt like the work of someone who was purely committed to being good at what they did, with no performance in it. You're not my enemy. Good. Crumb looked at his coffee. Then, what are you going to do? With the dragon. Harry looked at Fleur, who looked at Grandmere, who looked back at Harry with calm eyes. Something they won't expect, Harry said. Crumb considered this. Then he nodded, once, with the finality of a decision made. Then I will do something boring and competent, he said, and we will see who draws the horntail by lot. Me, Harry said. It'll be me. Crumb looked at him. You cannot know that. No, Harry agreed. But it'll be me. Fleur was looking at him with that expression again, the one that was several things at once and hard to read in the torchlight. Grandmere was watching the 3 of them around her table with the ancient, patient attention of someone who has lived long enough to know when a significant moment is happening and lets it happen without commentary. The candles burned. Outside, the November wind came off the lake. Inside the Beauxbatons carriage, something shifted, the way it shifts in rooms where three people have decided, separately and simultaneously, that they are in this together. Tomorrow night, Grandmere said finally, breaking the quiet, we train. All of you. She looked at Crumb. You have no Argenteau blood, Mr. Crumb. But you have aura of significant strength, and I can show you something useful regardless. She looked at Harry. And we are going to work on something new. Not the pause you have. What you need now is the application. She folded her hands. You are going to learn to aim. Harry sat up straighter. How? He asked. She looked at him with the look she had, that winter sky steadiness, the gold-flecked patience of someone who has waited 300 years for a bloodline to come home and finds, now that it has, that she doesn't want to waste a single hour. The same way everything real is learned, she said. Badly first. Then better. Then well. Harry smiled. It was, he thought, the most honest description of learning he'd ever heard. Right, he said. Let's go badly, then. And Fleur, who had been watching him carefully all evening, laughed, genuinely, not performed, a real sound that filled the carriage cleanly, and even Crumb's expression moved, fractionally, towards something warmer, and Grandmere picked up her papers with the composure of a woman who is not surprised by hope but is, nonetheless, glad of it. Chapter 4, What fire cannot burn? The morning of the first task arrived the way difficult things always do, too fast and too slow at the same time. The days before it compressed into a blur of practice and preparation, and then suddenly it was here, cold and grey, frost on the castle windows and the smell of wood smoke coming up from the tournament enclosure beyond the forbidden forest. Harry woke before his alarm. He lay in bed for a moment with his hands behind his head, staring at the dark canopy of his four-poster, and took stock. The ember was steady. Not spiked with adrenaline, not flattened with dread, just present, burning low and even, the constant companion it had become over 3 months. He breathed the way Grandmere had taught him. In through the nose, attention settled in the space between heartbeat and intention. He felt the warmth acknowledge the breath. Expand slightly. Hold. 30 seconds, he thought. He could hold 30 seconds now. Under 4 simultaneous stimuli, in the compressed space of the carriage, with Grandmere doing things that were genuinely alarming and Fleur and Crumb adding their own auras to the pressure. A nesting horntail was a different kind of pressure. But the principle was the same. Feel the surge. Find the gap. Aim. He got up, dressed, and went downstairs. Ron was already in the common room, which was unusual enough to be notable. He was sitting in the armchair nearest the fire with his knees together and his hands clasped and the expression of someone significantly more anxious than the person the anxiety was about. Hey, Harry said. Hey. Ron looked up. His ears were red. You all right? Yeah. Good. A pause. I mean, you're sure? Because dragons, Harry. I know what it is. Harry sat on the arm of the sofa nearest him. Ron. Yeah. I'm going to be fine. Ron stared at him. Then something in his expression shifted, something that had been tight and wound up since the moment Harry's name had come out of the goblet released slightly, because he was looking at Harry's face and finding the same thing everyone had been finding for 3 months, the steadiness. The settled quality. The absence of the particular frightened look that 14-year-old Harry had always been able to suppress in public and never quite managed in private. You actually mean that, Ron said slowly. Yeah. Right. Ron nodded. Swallowed. Okay. He unclasped his hands. So. Breakfast? Breakfast, Harry said. The great hall was louder than usual, the tournament energy having reached a fever pitch overnight, with every table buzzing and the Hogwarts champions, Cedric, who'd arrived with his prefect composure intact but his color slightly high, and Harry, who ate his eggs with the tranquil attention of someone for whom the task had been thoroughly prepared for, drawing constant glances from every direction. Across the room, the Beauxbatons table was conducting a parallel performance of contained anxiety, except for Fleur, who was eating and occasionally looking toward the Gryffindor table in the particular way of someone monitoring a variable. Their eyes met once. Harry gave her a slight nod. She looked at her plate. Hermione appeared at his elbow halfway through breakfast and sat down with the energy of someone who had been awake since 4 and had produced a great deal in the interim. "I've been thinking about the horntail specifically," she said without preamble. The Hungarian horntail is distinctive from the other 3 task dragons in 3 ways. First, it has a longer flame range. Standard combat texts put it at 22 feet for sustained flame and up to 40 for a burst. Second, its egg-sitting behavior is more aggressive than all other known dragon species. It will not retreat from the nest regardless of threat assessment. Third, she hesitated. "What?" Harry said. "It's the most magically sensitive of the 4. Which means conventional spellwork around it tends to agitate it more than it would agitate, say, the Welsh Green." She looked at him carefully. "What I mean is, standard defensive charm work, the kind every champion is probably planning to use, that might make a horntail more dangerous, not less." Harry thought about this. But aura casting is different. It's not conventional spellwork. It's a projection of magical intent through a different mechanism entirely. She folded her hands on the table. "Theoretically, and I want to be clear that I'm working from 300-year-old texts and Grandmere's description, a Veela auracast might read as closer to a natural magical field to a creature like a dragon. Not a threat. Not an attack. Just presence." She met his eyes. The original Argenteau line had a documented relationship with dragons. There are 2 references in the pre-17th century histories. Harry put his fork down. "You think I can talk to it," he said. "I think you might be able to communicate with it," Hermione said carefully. "Not in language. In the way magical creatures communicate, aura to aura, field to field. I think you might be able to make it understand that you're not a threat to the egg." She paused. "I'm not saying it will definitely work. Dragons are not Veela and the relationship is not well documented. But the historical references suggest, it's the right call," Harry said. He felt the ember confirm it, the warmth shifting with the particular quality it had when his instinct aligned with his thinking, the 2 things coming together into something clear. "It's the right call." Hermione looked at him for a long moment. "You already knew." "I suspected." "You found the evidence." He picked up his fork again. "That's why we're a good team." She made a small, slightly flustered sound and opened her notebook, which he'd learned meant she was pleased but wasn't going to say so. The champion's waiting area under the tournament arena was a large tent furnished with the same inadequate for the occasion quality as a doctor's waiting room, several chairs, a table, a fire that was doing its best. Crumb was in the corner, still as a statue, doing something with his breathing that looked deliberate. Cedric was pacing in a short, controlled loop and stopped when Harry came in, giving him the nod of someone who was glad of the company. "You drew yet?" Cedric asked. "No." Fleur was already there, seated with her hands flat on her knees and her chin up. She looked at Harry when he entered with a gaze that went straight past the social surface directly to something more immediate. Her hand moved briefly to the silver chain at her throat, not warming, then. He was calm enough for that. She looked slightly surprised. "You're not nervous," she said. "Not really," Harry said. "How?" It wasn't quite a question. More an expression of baffled respect. "I know what I'm going to do." He sat down across from her. "Knowing what you're going to do helps." "I know what I'm going to do," she said, a slight edge to it, "and I am still nervous." "Fair," Harry said. "The Welsh Green?" Her eyes sharpened slightly. "You are guessing." Grandmere said partial Veela blood tends toward the subtler magical expressions. The Welsh Green is the most magic responsive of the 4, most likely to react well to what you have. He paused. I could be wrong. She looked at him for a long moment with an expression that had moved through at least 3 distinct phases in about 4 seconds. You are very strange, she said, with something in her voice that was not an insult. Yeah, Harry said. I know. Ludo Bagman came in with his customary boisterous energy, looking at the 4 champions with the expression of a man who found other people's mortal peril enormously enjoyable, and produced the small silk bag with the miniature dragons inside. Each champion reached in. Cedric pulled a tiny grey-blue dragon that immediately flapped to the end of his finger and sat there looking indignant. Swedish short snout. Fleur pulled a small green dragon that made a sound like a kettle. Welsh green. She looked at Harry. He gave her the smallest possible I told you so expression. She pressed her lips together against something. Crumb pulled a scarlet dragon that spat a spark. Chinese fireball. Harry reached in and felt the tiny creature in his palm before he brought it out, and even at 3 inches long the Hungarian horntail had a quality of density that the others didn't, a solidity, like holding a piece of compressed storm. He opened his hand. It sat on his palm and looked up at him with eyes like molten copper and opened its jaw in a tiny, precise snarl. Harry looked at it. The ember stirred. The miniature horntail paused mid-snarl. Yeah, Harry said quietly, to himself. Thought so. Bagman was saying something enthusiastic about the order of competition, Cedric first, then Crumb, then Fleur, then Harry last. Harry barely registered it. He was thinking about what Hermione had said. Not a threat. Presence. Aura to aura, field to field. He sat back down and the miniature dragon climbed to his wrist and sat there with its tail curled around his pulse point, which Bagman noticed and looked unsettled by, and Harry ignored Bagman and thought about what he was going to do. The waiting was the worst part. This was always true, Harry had found, the space before the thing was always harder than the thing itself. He listened to the crowd noise change as Cedric went first. The roar of reaction, a crash that suggested something large moving, sustained applause when it resolved into the particular cheer of a crowd that had seen something good. Cedric had got his egg. Harry felt the ember move briefly in what he was learning to recognize as response to a person he was emotionally invested in, warm and relieved. Crumb's turn was shorter and louder. Something cracked against stone, the crowd went wild, then settled into applause again. Good. Both of them threw. Fleur's was different. The crowd went quieter, not the anxious quiet of something going wrong but the held-breath quiet of something genuinely beautiful happening. The sound built slowly and then broke into applause that was longer than either of the others. Harry smiled to himself in the tent. Whatever she'd done, it had worked. Then Bagman came back and looking flushed and excited and said, "Your turn, Harry," with the energy of someone who had bet money on this and was about to find out if they'd chosen right. Harry stood up. He walked out of the tent and into the open air of the arena. The enclosure was larger than he'd imagined from descriptions, a rough oval of rocky terrain carved into the hillside, with great stone walls on 3 sides and the stands filling the fourth in tier after tier of faces. 80, 90 people, no, more, the stands were enormous, and the noise that hit him when he walked through the gate was physical, a wave of sound that had texture to it. He didn't look at the crowd. He looked at the horntail. She was on the far side of the enclosure, crouched over a clutch of eggs in a nest of stone and charred earth, and she was enormous. Not the way the miniature had been enormous, with all the qualities of something condensed. This was the full expression, roughly 25 feet of black-scaled dragon that radiated heat visible as a shimmer in the cold morning air, and she was already watching the gate where Harry had emerged with the acute, focused attention of a creature that had been on alert since the first champion walked in and had not stopped being on alert since. Harry stopped just inside the gate and looked at her across the length of the enclosure. The crowd noise dropped slightly. Not because anything dramatic had happened, he hadn't done anything yet, but because there was something about the way he was standing that made the energy in the arena shift. He wasn't running. He wasn't immediately pulling his wand. He was just standing, weight balanced, eyes on the dragon, and in the stand something about the quality of that stillness registered without people being able to say why. The Horntail's head tracked him. Her wings shifted. Harry breathed in. He let his attention settle in the space between heartbeat and intention, the gap Grandmere had shown him, and he let the ember come up. Not forcing it. Not reaching for it with urgency. Just allowing it, the way you allow a tide. It was going to come regardless, the question was whether you were braced or whether you moved with it. The warmth came up from his sternum and spread outward. He didn't direct it yet. He just let it be there, present and calm and genuinely, unmistakably warm in the same way a fire is warm, not threatening but not ignorable either. The Horntail went very still. One of the dragon handlers on the far side of the enclosure, crouched against the stone wall with a crossbow they were clearly hoping not to use, turned to look at his colleague. In the stands, someone said something inaudible and several people shushed them. Harry took a step forward. Slow. Deliberate. The dragon watched him. Her wings stayed open, not a threat display, he thought. More like she was using them for sensory input, the way cats use their whiskers. The ember in his chest read her as, present was the only word. Aware. Not afraid, not aggressive in the escalating way she'd been when Cedric and the others were in here, but something else. Something that was attention without hostility. He took another step. The Horntail made a sound that was nothing like the roar the crowd had presumably been expecting. It was lower, more internal, a vibration that Harry felt in his chest before he heard it. The ember responded to it immediately, rose slightly, steadied, like a call and a response. He was 20 feet from the nest now. He could feel the heat of her radiating against his face, against the back of his hands. Her eggs were behind her, 7 of them, dark and rough-shelled, and among them the golden tournament egg, smooth and incongruous. She hadn't moved from her position between him and the nest. Harry stopped. He looked at her directly. Not challenging, he was aware of the difference, in the same instinctive way he was aware of the difference between someone meeting your eyes in greeting and someone meeting your eyes in threat. He looked at her the way you look at something you respect. Something you have no intention of hurting. He let the warmth speak. Not in words, not in a wave, not in any of the directed applications he'd practiced in the carriage. Just in the fundamental quality of the field itself, present, warm, not hostile, not afraid, not predatory. Just here. Just this. The Horntail's wings folded. Not all the way. Not the full relaxation of a settled dragon. But partially, the aggressive wingspan display came in, degree by degree, until she was at something approaching resting position, still watching him but with an eye that had shifted from the fixed, laser focus of combat tracking to something wider and more complex. The crowd was completely silent. Harry kept the warmth steady. It wasn't costing him effort the way it had in the first weeks of practice, the hold was natural now, a sustained state rather than a sustained act. 30 seconds, 40, a minute. He was aware of the time passing not because he was counting but because he could feel the quality of the connection shifting as the Horntail settled further into it. She turned her head. Not away from him, sideways. The way a dog turns its head when it hears something interesting. Harry understood. He moved, very slowly, to his left. Away from the direct line between him and the nest. A wide arc, not rushing, not running, not threatening. Just moving. Stepping sideways through the rocky terrain of the enclosure with the even, deliberate pace of someone who knows where they're going and is not afraid of anything between them and it. The Horntail tracked him with her head. Her body stayed oriented to the nest. He moved around to the side of the eggs, still maintaining the field, still keeping the warmth steady and undemanding, and crouched beside the nest. The golden egg was at the outer edge of the clutch, almost as if it had been placed there by someone who understood that this would be easier than if it were buried in the center. He didn't think about who might have arranged that. He focused on the Horntail. She was watching him. He reached out and put his hand beside the golden egg and held it there for a moment, asking. Not in language. Not in any system he could have explained. Just in the quality of his presence and the direction of his attention and the fundamental honesty of what he was communicating. I need this one. Just this one. The others stay. The dragon made the low sound again. Longer this time. Harry closed his hand around the golden egg and stood up. The horntail did not move. He took 3 steps back from the nest, holding the egg against his chest, and the warmth began to ease back toward its resting state, the conversation, because that was what it had been, he realized, a conversation without words, reaching its natural end. He took 5 more steps back, and then 10, and the horntail's head turned back toward her eggs and her wings ruffled once and she settled, and Harry was standing in the center of the enclosure with the golden egg under his arm and a crowd of thousands in absolute, thunderstruck silence. He looked up at the stands for the first time since entering the arena. Thousands of faces. Every one of them wearing the expression of someone who had expected a battle and witnessed something they didn't have the category for. Then someone in the upper tier began to clap. Then more. Then the sound built from scattered applause into a wave, climbing the tiered stands from bottom to top, and by the time it reached full volume it was the loudest thing Harry had heard since the Quidditch World Cup itself, not the excited roar of a crowd watching violence but something different, something closer to the sound a crowd makes when they've seen something extraordinary and the sound is trying to carry the weight of that. Harry walked toward the gate. He was aware of the judges' table as he passed, Dumbledore, Maxime, Karkaroff, Bagman, Crouch, and he didn't look at all of them. He looked at Crouch. Because he needed to see the expression. Crouch was watching him with a face so carefully controlled that the control itself was information. The satisfaction he'd seen at the goblet selection, gone. In its place, something tighter. Recalculating. Whatever he'd expected to happen in this enclosure, he was busy revising his model of what Harry Potter was, and the revision was not welcome. Harry looked away and went through the gate. In the medical tent, Madame Pomfrey was fussing over a minor burn on his forearm that Harry hadn't noticed until she pointed it out, heat rash from the horntail's ambient temperature, not actual flame contact, and she fixed it in 30 seconds with an expression that suggested she found his continued intact condition vaguely suspicious. He sat on the cot and held the golden egg in both hands and thought about what had just happened. Footsteps outside. Then the tent flap, and Fleur came in first, then Cedric, then Crumb. All 3 of them looked at him with different versions of the same expression. Cedric's was odd but composed, the look of someone who is genuinely happy for another person and is also mentally cataloging what he just saw. Crumb's was the flat assessment face that Harry was learning meant he'd filed something significant and was deciding what to do with it. Fleur's was complicated. Happy, he thought. Something warm and something sharp and something careful about the warm, like she was measuring how much of it to show. You talk to it, Cedric said. Sort of, Harry said. Not in language. You walked up to a nesting Hungarian horntail, Cedric said again, as if repetition would make it compute. And you talked to it. In principle, yes. Crumb sat down on the cot across from Harry. The horntail is the most aggressive dragon species on record, he said. Handlers lose fingers. Sometimes more. He looked at Harry. She folded her wings. She did. For you. Yeah. Crumb stared at him for a long moment. Then he exhaled through his nose in a way that was as close to laughing as Harry had seen from him. Unbelievable, he said, with something in his voice that was not dismissal. What did the judges give you? Cedric asked. Harry looked at the scores. He'd been given a 9 from Dumbledore, which felt right. A 9 from Maxime. An 8 from Bagman, which seemed like a slight discount for style. An 8 from Karkaroff, which considering his connection to Crumb, who had scored 7s, was notable. And a 6 from Crouch. Harry looked at the 6 for a moment. Crouch gave you a 6. Cedric said, looking over his shoulder. He sounded outraged on Harry's behalf. You walked up to a horntail and asked for the egg politely and he gave you a 6. He's sending a message, Fleur said quietly. She was looking at the score with an expression that had gone flat and clear. He is trying to keep your score low enough that, she paused. Harry. What happens if you win the tournament? You get the prize, Harry said. 1,000 galleons and the Triwizard Cup. The cup is the portkey, she said. Harry looked at her. The ember surged and steadied. Right, he said. And if I win, I'm the one who touches it last. The tent went quiet in the specific way it goes quiet when a group of people arrive at the same understanding simultaneously. He needs you to win, Cedric said slowly. Whoever arranged this, they need you to be the one who touches the cup at the end. He looked at Harry. Which means they'll be managing your scores throughout. Not too low, not so obvious it can be challenged. But positioned. Keeping you in striking distance without guaranteeing your lead, so that the final task's result can be engineered. And if Crouch is the mechanism for that inside the scoring, Crumb said, then he will give scores throughout that look like reasonable assessments of a controversial entry. He paused. Plausible. Difficult to challenge. Harry held the golden egg. The ember was very steady. He thought about Voldemort, thought about whatever state the man was in, bodiless, diminished, waiting, and about the fact that someone had built a machine this elaborate to get Harry Potter to the end of a corridor the cup was pointing toward. It was, he thought, one of the more complex compliments he'd ever received. Right, he said again. He put the golden egg down on the cot beside him. So we need to figure out where the cup is actually pointing, and we need to do it before the final task. He looked around at the three of them. Not just me. All of us. Cedric nodded without hesitation. Crumb looked at the tent entrance, then back at Harry, with the expression of someone who has fully crossed a line they were considering and is not going back. Yes, he said. Fleur said nothing. She reached up and touched the silver chain at her throat, and this time it wasn't checking for warmth, it was a different gesture, Harry thought. More like steadying. More like someone putting their hand on something they trust. I will tell Grandmere tonight, she said. Tell her everything. The scores, Crouch, the cup destination theory. He met her eyes. Tell her we need to know where the portkey is set. She will know how to find out, Fleur said, with a certainty that was not bravado. Just knowledge of what Grandmere was capable of. Good. Harry stood up. And tell her thank you. For the training. He paused. It worked. Fleur's expression did the complicated thing again, several layers at once, warm and sharp and something that might have been softer than she intended, briefly. Yes, she said. It did. The scores were posted publicly before dinner, which meant the Great Hall that evening was a three-ring circus of opinions about Harry Potter and his dragon strategy. Harry ate his dinner and let it wash over him with the particular ease of someone who has stopped needing external validation and finds, as a result, that the noise of it no longer hurts. 40 points, Ron said, going over it for the third time. First place by 4 points over Fleur. Harry, first place. I know, Ron. You're winning the Triwizard Tournament. Currently. You walked up to a dragon and, Ron. Ron grinned. It was the grin that was uncomplicated and real, the one Harry had loved from the first day in the train compartment, and it was directed at Harry with the full force of genuine pride that had nothing performative in it, not awe, not jealousy, just happiness that his friend had done something remarkable. You're brilliant, Ron said simply. Harry looked at his plate. The ember moved. Thanks, mate. Across the hall, Rita Skeeter had appeared from somewhere and was moving through the crowd with her quick quotes quill and the expression of a woman who had been handed a story and was determining its shape. Harry watched her without turning his head, the peripheral awareness of a threat without hostility, which he was getting better at, and thought about how the story would be framed. The boy who survived, the boy who talked to dragons. The mystery champion, the impossible selection. None of those framings were wrong. None of them were complete. He didn't mind. The story of what he was would emerge in its own time, at his pace, on terms he intended to have some say in. Rita Skeeter could have her version in the meantime. Later, walking back to the Gryffindor Tower with Ron and Hermione, he looked up at the castle and felt the familiar complicated love of the place, stone and magic and history, everything that had been home when he hadn't had one, everything that was complicated now that he understood himself better. The ember burned steadily in the castle air, and the magic of the building's foundations hummed against it in the way that very old things recognized each other, and Harry walked through it all with his hands in his pockets and the golden egg under his arm and the clear, grounded sense of someone who knows what they are and is only beginning to understand what they can do. He didn't look like a boy walking into something terrible. He looked, Hermione thought, watching him from 2 steps behind, like someone who has already decided how it ends. She wrote that down too. He was halfway up the marble staircase when the presence behind him made him stop. Not a sound. Not a visual. The aura sense, now too well developed to ignore, registered something in the corridor below, a familiar field, cold and controlled and deeply uncomfortable. Not hostile in the direct way. Hostile in the way something is hostile when it has a purpose it hasn't acted on yet. Harry turned around. Bartemius Crouch Jr., though Harry didn't know the man's name, not yet, was not in the corridor. What was in the corridor was a man he knew as Professor Moody, stumping along with his staff and his magical eye swiveling in its socket, and the aura around him was wrong. Wrong in a specific way. Wrong in the way a disguise is wrong to someone who can feel the field beneath the surface presentation, 2 auras occupying the same space, one projected over the other, and underneath the projected one, something that felt like cold stone and old fear and the particular wrongness of someone whose magic was bent in permanent cruelty. Harry stood on the staircase and looked at Not Moody. The magical eye swiveled to him. "Good work today, Potter," Not Moody said, in the growling voice Harry had been hearing in defense classes all term. "Thanks," Harry said. He kept looking. Not Moody looked back with the magical eye doing its constant, restless rotation, and beneath the projection Harry felt the wrongness pulse once, aware that it was being seen, he thought. Aware that something in Harry's assessment of the room had landed somewhere it wasn't supposed to reach. "Off to bed," Not Moody said, and stumped on. Harry watched him go. The ember was very still. Not calm still, alert still. The way it went when his processing was running fast and deep underneath the surface. He turned and went up the stairs, and in his room he sat on the edge of his bed and thought about double auras and polyjuice potion and Crouch's score and portkey destinations, and the ember connected the threads with the quiet precision of something that had been doing this, pattern recognition, threat assessment, the reading of what lay beneath presented surfaces, for as long as Harry could remember. He just never had the vocabulary for it before. He had it now. He reached for parchment and a quill and wrote 2 words at the top of a fresh sheet, Moody. Who? Then he started filling in what he knew, and the night settled around Hogwarts in its familiar cold and dark, and somewhere below him in the castle, the fake professor stumped along his corridor with his dual aura and his magical eye, and didn't know that the boy he'd been watching was, now, watching back. Chapter 5, The Coven Comes to Hogwarts. They arrived on a Tuesday, 3 weeks before the Yule Ball, in the way powerful people always arrive, without announcement and with the absolute expectation that the world would rearrange itself around their presence. Harry was crossing the courtyard after charms when he felt them. Not saw. Felt. 3 distinct aura signatures coming through the main gates, each one with the specific Veela harmonic he'd learned to recognize over months of training, and each one carrying a weight that was different from Grandmere's, different from Fleur's, different from anything he'd felt before. Where Grandmere's field was winter sky, vast and still and silver, these 3 were something else. Denser. Older. And one of them was cold in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. He stopped walking. Beside him, Ron walked 3 more steps before noticing and turning back. Harry. People just came through the gate, Harry said, looking toward the main entrance without seeing it yet. Veela elders. 3 of them. Ron looked at the gate and then at Harry and then at the gate. How do you know? I can feel them. He was already changing direction. Tell Hermione. Tell her to come to the entrance hall. He didn't wait to see if Ron would comply. Ron always complied with that particular tone of Harry's voice, which was not commanding so much as simply certain. Harry was already moving across the courtyard, the ember in his chest tracking the 3 signatures with the attention of a compass needle that's found multiple norths simultaneously and is trying to rank them by priority. He came through the entrance hall doors as they were coming up the front steps. The first was a tall woman, perhaps 70, with the silver-white hair of full Veela blood and the particular way of moving that Grandmere had, the complete economy of motion, nothing wasted, every step deliberate. Her aura was warm and measured. Apollin's ally, Harry guessed. Voss had mentioned her. The second was a small, dark-haired man of perhaps 60 who looked, at first glance, like someone's gentle academic uncle. Round face, wire-rimmed glasses, a scholar's slight stoop. His aura was the neutral one, carefully contained, revealing nothing. He was also, Harry noted, the most deliberate concealer of the 3. The control was too perfect to be natural. He was managing something. The third was Bertrand Castle. Harry knew him before anyone said a name, because Voss had told him the one who is not merely concerned, and the aura of the third man confirmed it in every particular. He was perhaps 75, broad across the shoulders, with the weathered look of someone who had spent decades outdoors, and his field was cold in the specific way of old ideology held with genuine conviction. Not malice. Certainty. The most dangerous kind of cold, because it didn't know it was cold. It thought it was warmth. Castle's eyes found Harry immediately. Across the entrance hall, before introductions, before Dumbledore appeared on the stairs above them looking unsurprised in the way he always looked unsurprised, Castle looked at Harry with an expression that combined relief and assessment and something territorial that Harry didn't like at all. Mr. Potter, Castle said. Counselor Castle, Harry said. He had not been told the man's title, but it was an easy guess and the slight shift in Castle's expression confirmed it. Welcome to Hogwarts. Dumbledore descended the stairs with the dignified unhurry of a man who has decided the pace of every room he enters. Counselor Castle. Counselor then Ace. He nodded to the tall woman. Counselor Argenteau. The small man with the glasses. This is unexpected. I wrote ahead, Castle said. You wrote to the Ministry of Magic, Dumbledore said pleasantly. They forwarded your letter this morning. I received it approximately 40 minutes ago. A pause. But you are here, and you are welcome. Shall we speak in my office? Here is fine, Castle said. He was still looking at Harry. What I have to say concerns Mr. Potter directly. He should hear it. Dumbledore's eyes moved to Harry. The faintest question. Harry gave him nothing back. He was looking at Castle with the clear, unhurried attention he'd learned from months of watching Grandmere, and the ember in his chest was very steady and fully awake. Then here is fine, Dumbledore agreed. What Castle had to say took about 8 minutes, and it was delivered with the precise, formal language of someone who had prepared it and was now performing the preparation. The substance was this: the Coven of Argenteau, having received Adele Beaumont's report of the Argenteau heir's identification, had convened an emergency council session. The council had determined, by a vote of 7-4, that the heir, if confirmed, was subject to Coven law as it pertained to dormant bloodlines. Coven law in this area was specific. An heir of a primary bloodline who had been separated from the Coven for more than one generation was to be formally reintegrated. The process of reintegration included a period of, Castle used the word guidance, very carefully, under Coven supervision. Harry listened to all of this with his hands in his pockets. When Castle finished, there was a brief silence, and then Harry said, "No." Castle blinked. "Not guidance," Harry said. "Not supervision. Not reintegration under Coven authority." He kept his voice level, not confrontational, not aggressive, just precise. "I'm happy to learn about the Coven and the Argenteau legacy. I've been doing that. I'm happy to acknowledge the bloodline. But I'm not going to be placed under anyone's authority on the basis of a law that was written about a situation that doesn't apply to me. The law is clear, Castle began. The law was written for infants, Harry said. Children separated from their families and recovered. I'm not a recovered child. I'm a person who has been a person for 14 years with my own choices and my own allegiances and my own understanding of what I am. He met Castle's eyes. The coven didn't know I existed. I didn't know what I was. Nobody was separated from anybody. The situation the law describes didn't happen here. Castle looked at him with the expression of someone who has encountered an argument they expected and has a counter prepared, and Harry felt the counter coming in the slight shift of the man's aura, a gathering, a readying. The law is not about the circumstances of separation, Castle said. It is about the status of the bloodline and the responsibility of the coven to Bertrand. The tall woman, then Ace, spoke for the first time. Her voice was quiet and very dry. Let the boy speak. Castle closed his mouth. Then Ace looked at Harry with eyes that were pale and sharp and far more amused than her expression suggested. You said you're happy to acknowledge the bloodline, she said. What does that mean to you, practically? It means I know what I am, Harry said. I'm learning what that means, what the Argenteau line carried, what the Fleur does, how it works. I'm training under Madame Beaumont's guidance because she offered and because I trust her and because the knowledge is mine to have. He paused. What it doesn't mean is that the coven gets a vote on what I do with my time or my life or my magic. Then Ace nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something. The small man, Arnaud, had been watching the whole exchange with the attentive stillness of someone whose neutrality was genuine and not performed. He'd barely moved. His aura had stayed carefully sealed. I would like to confirm the bloodline formally, Arnaud said suddenly. His voice was mild and academic and entirely at odds with the political weight of the room. Not for legal purposes. For historical ones. I am a genealogist. The Argenteau line's history has been my life's work. He looked at Harry over his glasses. May I? Harry looked at him. The ember was quiet, no alarm, no particular alertness. Just the baseline steady warmth that he'd come to trust as meaning no immediate danger. What does formally mean? Harry asked. I place my hand near yours and read the aura. Nothing more. It takes 30 seconds. He paused. Adele Beaumont's reading is sufficient for me, honestly. But the record should have a secondary confirmation. All right, Harry said. Arnaud approached, unhurried, unthreatening, moving with the absent-minded quality of someone thinking about something else while their body handles the logistics. He extended his hand, palm up, and Harry placed his own palm above it without contact, a few inches of air between them. Arnaud closed his eyes. The 30 seconds passed. Arnaud opened his eyes and withdrew his hand and looked at Harry with an expression that had lost all of its academic mildness. Something raw had come through it, not sentimentality, nothing so simple as that, but the expression of someone who has spent their entire professional life searching for something and is now looking at it and hasn't fully calculated how to feel. Full Argenteau expression, he said quietly. The Fleur at primary saturation. I haven't, he stopped. Steadied himself. In 40 years of genealogical work, I have not encountered a living sample at this level. He looked at Castle. Adele understated it, if anything. Castle's cold certainty did something complex in the wake of this. The certainty didn't waver, but it became more complex, like a simple chord gaining additional notes that complicated the original melody without resolving it. Dumbledore, who had been standing to one side through all of this with the expression of someone watching a chess match they've been invited to observe, said, perhaps we should continue this conversation somewhere more comfortable. I'm comfortable here, Harry said. He looked at Castle. Counselor. I understand what you want and I understand why you want it. The Argenteau bloodline is important to the coven. You're worried about what happens if I do something, or become something, without coven guidance. He kept the man's gaze. What I'm telling you is that I'm already getting guidance. From someone I trust. And what I do with what I am will be my choice. If it happens to align with what the coven wants, good. If it doesn't, that's also an outcome you're going to have to work with. He paused. I'm not an enemy of the coven. But I'm not its instrument either. So you can tell me which version of this relationship the coven prefers, because I'm ready to work with either one, but only one of them requires my active cooperation. The entrance hall was very quiet. Somewhere above them, portraits were listening with unconcealed interest. Castle looked at Harry for a long moment. Then he looked at Ace. Then at Arnaud. Then back at Harry. You are, he said carefully, not what I expected. People keep saying that, Harry said. Something passed across Castle's face that was not quite humor and not quite displeasure and might, in the right light, have been a grudging species of respect. We will speak again, he said. Before the Yule Ball, if possible. More privately. Fine, Harry said. Castle turned and walked toward the doors with the bearing of someone whose dignity is intact even if his position has been complicated. Then Ace lingered a moment longer, looking at Harry with those sharp, pale eyes. He means well, she said quietly. Indicating Castle with a slight tilt of her head. I know, Harry said. That's not really the issue. She studied him. No, she agreed. I suppose it isn't. Something warm moved briefly through her expression. You are very like her, you know. The last Argenteau. The histories describe someone who was entirely capable of holding a room without raising his voice. She looked around the entrance hall as if seeing something he couldn't. Different eyes. Same gravity. She walked out after Castle. Arnaud remained. He was looking at Harry with the expression that hadn't fully recovered from the bloodline confirmation, still raw, still processing. May I ask you something, he said. Yeah. Has it been difficult? He seemed to search for more precise language and not find it. Knowing. Having always had it and then knowing what it was. Harry thought about that honestly. No, he said. It's been the opposite, actually. Like finding out the weight you've been carrying has a name. He paused. The difficult part was before. Not having the name for it. Arnaud nodded slowly. He looked like a man filing something away in a very large and well-organized archive. Thank you, he said simply. He left. Dumbledore looked at Harry across the now empty entrance hall. Well, he said. Yeah, Harry said. You handled that rather decisively. I meant what I said. I know. Dumbledore looked at the doors the elders had gone through, then back. Harry. About Moody, I know Moody isn't Moody, Harry said. The silence that followed was one of the more loaded ones they'd shared. How long? Dumbledore asked. Night of the first task. I felt two auras occupying the same space. Harry looked at him steadily. Polyjuice potion, I think. Someone's been wearing his face all year. He paused. Who? Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful in the specific way it got when he was deciding how much to say. I have a strong suspicion, he said. I do not yet have confirmation. I am working toward it. He met Harry's eyes. I need you to continue to treat him as you have been. Don't let him know you've identified the deception. Already doing that, Harry said. He's useful where he is. If we pull him out before we know his full purpose, we lose information. Dumbledore looked at him with the expression that Harry was getting used to, the recalibration, the quiet reassessment. Yes, he said. Exactly so. A pause. You might have made a very fine aura. I might make a very fine a lot of things, Harry said, without particular vanity. Just as observation. I'm still working out the list. He went back across the courtyard to find Ron and Hermione, and the November afternoon settled cold and bright around Hogwarts, and in the carriage by the lake Grandmere received Fleur's account of everything that had happened with an expression that moved between satisfaction and private worry, and she sat for a long time after Fleur finished with her hands around her cup and her eyes on the rolling hills through her conjured window. He handled Castle, Fleur said. It wasn't entirely a question. Yes. Grandmere's voice was quiet. That is not what worries me. What worries you? Grandmere looked at the window for another moment. The Phil d'Or at full expression, she said slowly, is not simply power. It is a field. It radiates whether the practitioner intends it to or not. She set her cup down. Harry has been in this school for 4 years. Every person who has spent sustained time near him has been, without knowing it, within his field. She paused. Do you understand what that means? Fleur was quiet. It means the loyalty he inspires, Grandmere said, the trust people place in him, the way they follow him into dangerous situations they would otherwise refuse, all of it is real. None of it is manipulation. The Phil d'Or does not compel. It does not coerce. She folded her hands. But it does amplify. It makes the true things truer. It makes genuine affection into something that feels like certainty. She looked at Fleur. People around him are more themselves than they would otherwise be. Braver. More honest. More alive. A pause. That is a profound responsibility. And Harry does not know he has been carrying it. Fleur looked at her hands on the table. Thought about Harry in the champion's tent after the dragon. Thought about Cedric and Crumb, both of whom had made choices they hadn't expected to make. Should we tell him? She asked. Yes, Grandmere said. But not tonight. Tonight there is something more immediate. She reached for the Hogwarts map, the old, annotated one, and spread it on the table. The Yule Ball is in 3 weeks. The Coven Elders will be in the area. Castle is not finished with his argument. And whoever modified the Goblet of Fire is going to be watching the ball as a political event. She looked at the map. We need to use the ball. To do what? To declare. She looked at Fleur steadily. Harry goes to the ball as Harry Potter, Hogwarts champion and Triwizard competitor. He goes knowing that the Coven is watching, that Voldemort's agents are watching, that the press is watching. She smoothed the map with one hand. And he goes having just spent 3 months becoming more himself than he has ever been. Let them all watch. She paused. Let them see what they are dealing with. Fleur thought about this. He'll need a partner, she said, with the particular careful quality of someone stating a fact rather than raising a topic. Grandmere looked at her. Fleur looked at the table. Yes, Grandmere said, with the composure of someone who has been watching this develop and is choosing not to make it larger than it is yet. He will. Harry asked her 2 days later. Not in any of the ways she'd imagined it, not with the formal awkward quality of the other boys who had been working up to asking her all week, not with the hopeful nervousness she'd been navigating around every corridor. He came to the carriage for the evening session, sat down across from her where they'd been working on the second stage aura exercises, and said, before Grandmere arrived, I'd like to go to the ball with you. If you want. Fleur looked up from her notes. He was looking at her with the direct, unadorned quality she'd been getting used to, no performance in it, no calculation. Just asking. Why, she said, which was not the response she'd planned. He didn't seem thrown by it. Because I'd rather spend the evening with someone who knows what I am than someone who thinks they're with the Triwizard champion, he said. And because you're the most interesting person I know at Hogwarts right now. And because I think you'd actually enjoy it if you weren't managing the weight of being Fleur Delacour for 5 hours. Fleur was quiet for a moment. That is a very strange way to ask someone to a dance, she said. Is it a no? She looked at him for a long moment. The careful assessment that she'd been conducting since the World Cup, layer by layer, case by case, all the accumulated evidence of 3 months, the dragon, the coven elders, the way he'd looked at Grandmere's overwhelming aura display and held the pause and said not yet with complete composure. The way he told her about the Welsh green before the task with the matter-of-fact generosity of someone for whom sharing advantage was simply the obvious choice. The way he'd laughed at her in the carriage when she'd made the dry comment about 30 seconds, the first time she'd heard him laugh like that, unguarded, real, the laugh of someone who isn't performing being relaxed but actually is. "No," she said. "It is not a no." Something in his expression moved, not surprise, not relief, something quieter and more genuine than either. "Good," he said. "You should know," she added, "that the press will write things about it. Rita Skeeter's going to write things about me regardless." "About us," Fleur said precisely. "Still regardless," Harry said. He picked up the exercise notes she'd been working on and turned them toward himself. "Should we do the second stage thing before Grandmere gets here and makes it significantly harder?" Fleur looked at him for one more moment. Then she took the notes back. "Yes," she said. "We should." The Yule Ball transformed the Great Hall into something that Hogwarts presumably remembered from centuries past, great ice sculptures throwing blue light across the floor, enchanted snow that fell from the enchanted ceiling and never quite reached the ground, hundreds of candles multiplied in the ice until the room seemed to be lit from inside itself. The weird sisters were tuning up on a raised stage at the far end, and the effect of their warm-up drifting through the cold-lit grandeur of the room was exactly as wonderful as the contrast suggested. Harry came down the stairs into the entrance hall in his dress robes. Hermione had managed the robes question with practical efficiency, appearing 2 weeks before the ball with a set in dark green that she'd found, she said, in a Hogsmeade shop that was slightly less awful than Madame Malkin's, and they were actually good, fitted properly, and the green was the right green for his eyes, which he wasn't going to point out but which Hermione clearly knew, and he found Fleur already in the entrance hall. She was in pale silver, which was not a surprise, and her hair was down in a way he hadn't seen before, and she was talking to Cedric's partner, a girl from Ravenclaw whose name Harry couldn't currently access, with the relaxed, genuine ease of someone who was not performing tonight. She turned when she heard him on the stairs. Whatever she'd been expecting, she rearranged her expression from it into something that was composed and warm and contained one specific note of approval that she clearly hadn't meant to transmit and was now managing with the expert composure of someone who had been managing her own expression since age 11. "Green suits you," she said. "Silver suits you," Harry said. "It always does," she said, which was the driest possible delivery and landed exactly right, and Harry laughed, and she looked slightly pleased with herself. Cedric appeared beside them in dark grey, which was the right call, with his Ravenclaw date on his arm and the dazed but present expression of someone experiencing something enjoyable and tracking it clearly. He looked at Harry and Fleur together with the expression of someone connecting a thread they'd been watching develop for weeks. "Right," he said, with a smile that said he was not going to comment and was absolutely filing it away. "Don't," Harry said. "I wasn't going to say anything," Cedric said. "You were thinking it loudly," Harry said. Crumb arrived with Hermione on his arm, which had produced approximately 15 minutes of stunned silence from Ron when she'd announced it 2 days prior and which Harry thought was probably good for everyone involved, including Ron, who needed to occasionally be surprised by the people he thought he understood completely. Hermione looked different tonight, not uncomfortable different but present in a way she often muted, her hair done properly, wearing robes she'd clearly chosen rather than defaulted to, and the look of someone who had made a decision about how to spend this evening and was committed to it. "You look great," Harry told her. She gave him a look that was pleased and businesslike simultaneously. "You both look," she stopped, looked at Harry and Fleur standing together, and something moved through her expression that was warm and analytical and faintly emotional, quickly contained. "Good," she said. "You both look very good." Fleur looked at Hermione with genuine warmth. "You also." Hermione and Fleur had come to a mutual understanding in the second week of term that had evolved into something that wasn't quite friendship but was a species of deep professional respect, two highly capable people who'd recognized each other across the cultural divide and decided to be useful to each other, which was, Harry thought, more durable than most friendships anyway. The doors opened and the champions led the first dance, which was the one part of the ball Harry had been genuinely concerned about until Fleur had spent 20 minutes in the carriage 2 weeks ago showing him the basics with the particular no-nonsense efficiency of someone who danced well and was not interested in false modesty about it. He wasn't perfect, but he was competent, and competent with Fleur turned out to be something more than competent, because she was an effortless lead disguised as a follow, and once Harry understood that they were, in practice, navigating together, it resolved into something that felt, not graceful, exactly, but real. The crowd watched the 4 champion pairs on the dance floor. Harry was aware of them in the peripheral way, the specific cocktail of attention, of which he'd been the subject his whole life and had finally, this year, stopped reacting to. He was also aware, more immediately, of the 3 Coven elders seated at a table near the right wall with Grandmere, who had been given a seat as Fleur's family representative. Then Ace was watching with the warm, sharp eyes. Arnaud had his notebook out, which was either genealogical instinct or social anxiety management. Castle was watching with the expression of someone making a final assessment. Harry looked at Castle across the dance floor, briefly, and gave him the small deliberate nod of someone who sees the watcher and is not disconcerted by it. Then he looked back at Fleur. Castle, Fleur said quietly. She'd caught the exchange. He's making up his mind about something, Harry said. About you. About whether I'm a problem or a resource, Harry said. He's going to decide I'm neither one. He turned them smoothly around a slower couple on the floor. He's going to decide I'm something he doesn't have a category for yet, and that's going to buy us time. Time for what? For everything else that's happening to resolve itself first. He met her eyes. The tournament. The portkey. Moody. All of it before the Coven becomes the main problem. She looked at him for a moment with the particular quality that had become his favorite of her expressions, not the warm one, not the sharp one, but the one that contained both and was trying to figure out which to lead with. You are always thinking, she said. You aren't. I am thinking about the dancing, she said, which was not entirely true and both of them knew it, but it was also a choice to be here, in this moment, in the cold blue light with the enchanted snow not quite falling, and it was the right choice, and Harry let it be the right choice. Okay, he said. Just the dancing. Just the dancing, she agreed, and the weird sisters shifted into something slower, and around them the dance floor filled with couples and the blue ice light moved and Harry Potter danced with Fleur Delacour at the Yule Ball and the Coven watched and Voldemort's agent watched and Rita Skeeter watched from somewhere she absolutely wasn't supposed to be, and none of them, Harry thought, were seeing what they expected to see. Castle found him 2 hours into the ball, on the courtyard terrace where Harry had stepped out for cold air and quiet, leaving Fleur in an animated conversation with then Ace that had started about Veela cultural history and appeared to have evolved into something more personal. Harry heard the old man coming, the aura sense gave him 15 seconds of warning, and he was already turned and leaning on the balustrade when Castle came through the terrace doors. Castle looked at him. Then he came and stood beside him at the balustrade, and looked out at the grounds, and was quiet for a long moment. I owe you an honest account, Castle said finally. All right, Harry said. I was afraid. He said it with the directness of someone who doesn't apologize for truth but knows when truth is owed. Not of you specifically. Of what happens when power of that magnitude is unguided. When someone with the Phil d'Or at full saturation moves through the world without understanding what they're doing to the people around them. He paused. I have seen what happens when Veela power goes wrong. When it operates without conscience or awareness. The damage is, he stopped. Old damage. From before your time. I understand the concern, Harry said. I do. But the answer to that concern isn't authority over me. The answer is what's already happening. He looked at the dark grounds. Grandmere. Fleur. Understanding what I am and choosing how to use it. He paused. The Phil d'Or doesn't compel people. It amplifies what's real. If who I am, underneath the power, is someone worth following, then the people who follow me are making a real choice. And if I'm not, he paused, then no amount of coven supervision fixes that. Castle was quiet for a moment. You know what the field does, he said. To the people around you. I found out recently. He turned to look at Castle. Does knowing change it? For most people with your level of power, knowing makes them more careful, Castle said. Or more reckless. Rarely anything in between. He studied Harry. Which will you be? More careful, Harry said. Not less present. More careful about the difference between what I'm doing on purpose and what the field is doing on its own. He held the man's gaze. That's the work. That's what Grandmere is helping me with. Castle looked at him for a long time. The cold certainty in his aura had shifted, not gone, not converted, but the simple chord quality of it had gained the additional notes. He was a man whose model of the situation was updating, and he was doing it with the dignity of someone for whom changing position was not capitulation but simply accuracy. The coven will want formal acknowledgement, he said. Eventually. Not authority. Not supervision. Just, he paused, acknowledgement that the bloodline is extant and that you know what you carry. I can do that, Harry said. When the time is right. When the time is right, Castle agreed. He straightened from the balustrade. Mr. Potter. There is something else you should know. He looked at the castle. Someone made contact with me 3 weeks ago. Through channels I will not specify. They were asking about you, about the Argenteau bloodline, about whether the coven had confirmed it and what our plans were for the heir. He looked at Harry directly. They were very interested in the confirmation status. Whether it was official. Whether it had been documented in coven records. Harry went very still. Who contacted you? I don't know. A pause. The contact was magical. Mediated. I could not trace the source. He paused. But the nature of the questions, what they wanted to know, how they framed it, suggested they already knew the bloodline was confirmed. They were asking about the official record for a different reason. To use it, Harry said. If there's an official coven record confirming the Argenteau heir, that record becomes leverage. Proof of what I am that someone else controls. Castle nodded slowly. I did not respond to the contact, he said. And I have not filed the confirmation with the main coven archive. I came here, partly, to tell you this. He met Harry's eyes. The formal acknowledgement can wait. Until you say otherwise. Harry looked at him for a moment. Something in his assessment of Castle shifted, not dramatically, but significantly. Not a traditionalist whose methods were different. A man who had done the right thing when it wasn't the convenient thing, and was being honest about both. Thank you, Harry said. Castle nodded. Started back toward the doors. Stopped with his hand on the frame. The contact used a phrase, he said, without turning. When they described you. They called you the variable that needs resolving. He paused. I thought you should know that too. He went inside. Harry stood on the terrace in the cold night air. The ground spread dark and quiet below him. Somewhere in the castle above, the weird sisters were playing something slow and the golden light of the great hall was warm against the dark windows. The variable that needs resolving. He turned that over in his mind. Not frightened by it, the ember was steady, the familiar warmth of it reassuring in the cold, but considering it. If Voldemort's agents were concerned enough about the Argenteau bloodline to contact coven elders and dig for confirmed records, then the bloodline itself was part of Voldemort's strategic thinking. Not just a way to get Harry to a portkey. Something bigger. He needed to talk to Grandmere tonight. Before the ball ended. He needed to know if she had any sense of what the confirmed Phil d'Or would change about Voldemort's plans. He was already turning back toward the doors when they opened and Fleur came out. She read his face in approximately 3 seconds. Castle, she said. He told me something important. He outlined it quickly, the contact, the phrase, the withheld record. She listened with the focused stillness she brought to things that mattered. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. The variable that needs resolving, she said. Yeah. She looked at him. You know what that means. If they want to resolve a variable, they mean to control it or eliminate it, Harry said. I know. He paused. I'm not worried about the elimination part. I've survived that before. The control part, she said. That's the more subtle problem. Yeah. He held her gaze. Which is why we're going to find out where the port key is pointing before the final task. And why I'm not touching that cup unless I know exactly what's on the other end of it. Fleur studied him for a long moment. The cold light came off the grounds below, and the ball light came through the doors behind them, and she was looking at him with an expression that had resolved itself, finally, into something that wasn't complicated at all. I am going to tell you something, she said. All right. When I came to Hogwarts, Grandmere said to stay close and observe and report back. She met his eyes directly. I stopped reporting back 3 weeks ago. I am still staying close. But the reason for it has changed. A pause. I thought you should know. Harry looked at her for a moment. The ember moved, warm and certain, the quality it had when the two things aligned. I know, he said. You knew. The vérité de sang thing, he said. It's hard to miss. She stared at him. Then she made a sound that was halfway between exasperation and laughter. Infuriating, she said, but her eyes were warm. You are genuinely infuriating. Sorry, Harry said, who was not. From inside, the music shifted into something faster and the noise of the ball lifted, and Harry held his hand out toward the door, and Fleur looked at the hand and at him and then took it without further ceremony, and they went back inside to where Grandmere was waiting with her sharp eyes and her old knowledge and something that was beginning, very carefully, to look like hope. Later, after the ball had wound down and the champions and their partners had separated and the great hall was being quietly restored to its daytime self by industrious house elves, Harry found Grandmere alone at her table with her maps and her coffee. He sat down across from her. She looked up. Castle told me about the contact, he said. Someone trying to get the official Argenteau confirmation through Coven channels. Yes. She set her cup down. I heard. Mireille Vos told me an hour ago, the same contact approached 2 other Coven members through different channels. All 3 were asked the same questions. About the official record. About timing, she said. Specifically, how long the confirmation process would take and whether it would be complete before the end of the school year. She held his gaze. Someone is working to a deadline. Harry thought about the tournament calendar. The final task in June. The port key at the end. They need me confirmed and documented before the end of the year, he said slowly. Not just in the tournament. Not just in the port key. They want the Argenteau identity established on record before whatever happens at the end of the year, so that what happens at the end of the year has context. Has political weight. Grandmere was very still. Say the rest, she said quietly. If Voldemort comes back, Harry said, and the Argenteau heir is confirmed and documented and publicly known, then what happens next has meaning beyond just Harry Potter surviving again. It becomes an Argenteau-line confrontation. Ancient blood against ancient evil. He paused. That's either a story Voldemort wants to control or a story he's terrified of. He looked at Grandmere. Which one? She looked at him for a long moment with her winter sky eyes and her gold-flecked patience. Both, she said. Depending on how it goes. A pause. Which is why we are not going to let it go on anyone's terms but yours. Harry nodded. Outside the castle windows, snow had begun to fall, real snow, not the enchanted kind, coming down slow and soft over the dark Scottish grounds, settling on the lake and the forest and the distant shape of the Beauxbatons carriage by the water's edge. "We need to find out where the port key is pointing," Harry said. "Yes," Grandmere said. "I have been working on it." She pulled the annotated map toward her. "Give me a week." "You have it," Harry said. She looked at him across the map. Old blood across a table from new fire, and the snow falling outside, and the castle's ancient magic humming in the stones around them. "Get some sleep," she said. Not unkindly. "You too," Harry said. She looked like she might say something. Then she simply nodded, and Harry got up and went out into the corridor and up through the quiet, snow-lit castle toward Gryffindor Tower, and the ember burned warm and steady and awake, and he did not feel like a variable that needed resolving. He felt like someone who was, for the first time, exactly where he was supposed to be.